My name is Tyrone White. I'm a former 6'5" Menlo Crip. Some of my rivalries were the blood gangs and the Crip gangs. We were involved in drive-by shootings as well as drug dealing, and this is how crime works. Yeah, of course, I've participated in drive-bys. I've been a victim of drive-bys plenty of times. When you're going against war with one another, there's no winners. Now you can look at it and say, okay, I shot more of their homies than they shot of mine, or I killed more of their homies or they killed of mine. But both sides are taking losses. So if you both are taking a loss of life, there's no winners. When I was coming up, the guns that were used in gang bangings were the 9mm, the 45s, Mossberg 12 gauge shotgun pump, AK-47s, Tech 9s. The first gun that I ever got placed in my hand, given to me as a gift from one of my homeboys, was a 25, a chrome 25, little small 25 with the pearl handle. Had like 7 shots, 6 shots in it or something like that. And as you got older and you learn more about guns and elevate yourself, of course, you get bigger guns. Guns are sold on the street like dope is sold on the street. You can even buy guns from enemy gangs, because right now it's a business. It's about making this money. They come from everywhere. Now, where they get them from could be from the police force. It could be from the military. You can never be caught what we call lacking or slipping. You got to always be ready. You got to have enough firepower. You are ready for war at all times. From the early 80s all the way up through the mid 90s, those were the years of heightened gang activities. So drive-by shootings were nothing. You could literally turn your news on every day during those years and see a drive-by shooting. I mean, every day. We had a drive-by shooting to where that I participated in. I walked in the house and I remember seeing it on the news. I must have been about 15 at that time. I remember my mom was on the phone and she was like, I'm so tired of these kids shooting one another and killing one another. And I remember thinking to myself, like, man, she has no idea that I was just in this situation. She never found out about it, but I just remembered the way that I felt listening to her on the phone, telling her friend, like, man, these kids need to stop this and this is crazy. And there's another situation to where we were getting ready to go out on what they call Sunday Fun Day, when all the lowriders, all the motorcycle clubs, all the car clubs, all the gang members, that's like the one day to where all the gang members, enemies, everybody can congregate in one area on Crenshaw Boulevard. I remember we seen a car pull up to the corner. And usually when you see cars pull up in the corner with no lights or anything like that, you know that's a sign of something that's gonna happen. And all you see was guns come out the window and everybody just got to shooting at everybody. And we all just scattered like ants, just everybody screaming, hollering, running, scattering, because no one had guns actually on their person at the time. One of my big homeboys, he was very known. He had got hit in the face because they shot with a 12 gauge and they had buckshots, but it didn't kill him because they weren't shot at close range. Luckily, nobody got killed. The Crips were founded in the 60s and by Raymond Washington. He formed the East Side Crips, which is on the east side of LA. Tiki Williams formed the West Side Crips. And through those two different foundations, different sets start to evolve. Different areas, the Hoovers, the East Coast, the Rolling 60s, the Menlos, all these different sets. The object and the goal was to keep this side of LA safe. But, as usual, things escalated, things multiplied, and violence became, shit happened. When Raymond Washington got killed, that's what caused the division. That's when Crippin became divided between the East and the West, and different things start happening in different subsets. And it just became like a disease. one Crip set betrayed this Crip set, and then it just caused a never-ending feud. Bloods used to be the main rivals of the Crips, but now there are just as many Crips are against one another than there are Bloods. A lot of Crips and Bloods have become allies because they share the same common Crip enemy. For example, the A-Trade Gangster Crips, they have a peace treaty going on with the Inglewood family Bloods. And that's because their borderline is connected right next to one another. So since our neighborhoods are so close to one another, you got to come through my neighborhood to get home. I got to come to your neighborhood to get home. Let's make this a blood-free zone. No violence. Not saying that we're homeboys or we're just a close hood, but let's keep the peace between this dynamic, between this area. The beef between the 6'5" Menlo Crips and the Hoover Crips, it goes way back. We actually all grew up together and went to school together. We became one of the biggest enemies to the Hoovers because our sets are so close to one another. To get to the Hoover hood, you got to come through our hood. You know what I'm saying? And so for us to get to other parts of the city, we got to go through the Hoover hood. I was born and raised in South Central LA all my life. Had a stepfather in my life that taught me how to be a man and different things. But for the most part, I was raised by a strong single mother. Usually in the Black neighborhoods, when kids that come from single parent homes like that, they usually get caught up in these streets because your mom is out working, trying to make a living for you, provide for you. While she's at work, you're out there running the streets, doing shit that you know you're not supposed to be doing. And that's pretty much how I started it. I was about 10 when I first started hanging around them. I knew them very well. It comes down to, hey, you've been hanging around us a lot. You've been chilling a lot. You from the hood. Let's make it official. And making it official means getting jumped in or doing something to be a member of the gang. It can be anything from you fighting one person, sometimes 4 or 5 persons. It's to see how you handle yourself. It's to see what type of skills you have. If you get into one of these type situations, can you stand your ground and hold your own, whether you get beat up or not? You have to know how to fight back. You got to be a monster to be a member of any gang, but particularly the Crips, you better be a monster. The word Crip was really originally meant community, resistance, and progress. It was a way to bring the community, to uplift the community, to protect the community. Of course, they took on a moniker and the appearance of a gang because according to the dictionary, a group of 5 or more people is considered a gang. To be a Crip, you have to carry yourself a certain way. You have to walk a certain way. But for me, the allure was I loved the color blue, and they wore blue rags. They wore blue jeans. They wore blue belts. They wore blue Chuck Taylors. The dress code for me back when I was an active Crip in the 90s, in the early 80s, it was definitely 501 Levi jeans, creased. I would go buy a can of starch and literally spend about an hour ironing my pants, layering the starch to the point to where before I even put my pants on, I could stand them up. Crips wore K-Swiss because it was an acronym. It was actually a disrespectful term towards the Bloods. It was called K-Swiss stood for kill slobs when I see some. Slobs is a disrespectful term towards the Bloods. If you wasn't a Crip, you couldn't Crip walk. If you wasn't a Crip, you didn't know how to Crip walk. And so to learn how to Crip walk and to actually perfect something like that was like a badge of honor. It's a cool thing. It's when you look at it, the feet movement, the way they dance, the way they do it, the way they incorporate certain moves, along with the hand signs and the hand signals. Words that you Crips usually use, which was part of the lingo, was, of course, cuz. Everything we say would start with a C. If you had to say burger, you say kurger. If you say you say sitch. It's just different things that you could replace the B with a C, you would do it. And that was the same thing with the Bloods. Anything with a C, they wanted to eliminate it. And it may sound strange, and people might be, no, that's stupid. Y'all sound stupid. That was our language. That was the way that we talked. We understood it. And that's all that matters. And if you disrespect us and tell us it sounds stupid, you might get your ass whooped. Of course, they throw up the C. You know, the C is just, you just take your hands, you make a C with your hands. And now you're set, your actual neighborhood, your Crip neighborhood, like the 60s, they have their signs. The Hoovers, they have their signs. The Menlos, they have their signs. You're going to throw up that sign to represent, to let people know that you're actually from that set. You're from that neighborhood. We threw up the M. It was just an M. You just take your hands, cross your, which is just how Ice Cube throw up the W when he's in concert and taking pictures. Snoop Dogg throws up the W. Just turn it upside down and you throw up the M. Gang graffiti is a big part of the Crips. People that are coming in there, they know when they see that on the wall, the Rolling 60 Crips or the Menlo Crips or the 5-5 Crips, they know we're entering this gang. This is their neighborhood. The gang structure is not so much organized like the Mafia with underbosses and bosses and stuff like that. We didn't give titles like that. But people automatically knew who the OGs were, who the double OGs were, who the big homies was, and who was ranked over who. The double OG is usually one of the big homies that has put in more work than you can imagine. He's done it all. Killed, robbed, made money, been to jail, you name it, he's done it. Usually 50s, 60s, you know, higher age, they were around in the 70s, in the 80s when gangbanging really just exploded. They were at the top of their game. An OG really falls, not too much different from a double OG, except that he may be a little younger, may have done a little less other crimes. Then you have some of the OGs that have turned their lives around and they just want to live life, have a family, have wife and kids, and they getting money, they're making money the legal way. So what makes them an OG is the fact that they're talking to the little homies, to the young homies, showing them and explaining to them how they were able to do this. Street soldier is exactly what that sounds like. A street soldier is going to go out there and put in that work for the OG, for the double OG, for the little homies, or just for the set and period. A street soldier has no limits. He's going to go out there and do what he has to do, no matter what. The little homies are usually, of course, what they sound like. The little homies that's looking up to the big homies. They're going to imitate, they're going to copy everything that the big homies do. And if the big homies is constantly going to jail, robbing people, shooting people, killing people, the little homies going to follow suit at some point. My main thing was always to look out for my big homie, or whoever called me they big homie, and make sure that he was taken care of and vice versa, because he does the same for me. He don't have to, but he does. I started out selling weed in middle school and then moved to crack cocaine and robbing. I did robberies. That was my way mostly of making money and keeping money in my pocket. The big homies had the big dope and they'll issue it out to the younger homies. They'll issue it down to the guys to the next level. And it was a way for everybody from the big homie, OG homies, all the way down to the homies in junior high school to make money. The homies in junior high school, they may be out there selling crack on the corners, $5 rocks, $10 rocks, $20 rocks. The big homies, they move in big weight, you know, ounces, quarter pounds, pounds, stuff like that. The drugs came from a lot of times from drug cartels and as well as the government, believe it or not. I mean, there's a story about Freeway Rick, one of the biggest black dope dealers in the history of Los Angeles. And he was caught up in that Iran-Contra stuff with Ronald Reagan, and come to find out that the DEA was supplying him with dope, the same dope that they gave him 30 years for in prison. So, you know, it's like, that's just how it worked. They put it in our neighborhoods to bring us down, to keep us down. Always a goal of Crips, to make a substantial amount of money and to open up your own business, whether it be a smoke shop, a liquor store, or a foods place, or whatever. That was the goal, to find a way to take that money and make it somewhat as legal as you can. The LA riots happened in 92. I was 18 years old at that time. The LA riots was a result of the Rodney King verdict. Those 4 officers that were clearly guilty as hell on video beating Rodney King half to death when they were found innocent, that just sparked something in the community. I didn't never think I would see nothing like that. The ground zero of the riots happened 5 blocks from my house. I was sitting at home watching the news. I seen the news. So we jump in the car, we drive up to the riots. By this time, you got hundreds and hundreds of people starting to migrate to Florence and Normandy. So at this point, it just kicked off. It was spreading like wildfire. Every car that came through the intersection that had a white person in it was getting attacked. I saw news reporters getting beat up. I saw cameramen getting beat up, getting the cameras taken from them. And at that time, it really didn't matter what gang you were from, because now it's a black against white thing now. So it didn't matter if you was a Blood or a Crip or whatever you was. Even though it was such a messed up day, it's such a fucked up day, it was also a day to kind of rejoice, because that was the first time in a long time that you saw common enemies, Crips and Bloods and Mexican gangs, come together against this one common enemy, the LAPD. And so after days of rioting, some of the community leaders like Jim Brown, the football player, a couple of popular gang leaders from different gangs, from different areas, different sets, had a meeting and decided that this was the perfect opportunity to try to bring a peace treaty, a truce between the gangs. Even though it was something bad that caused us to get to that level, it still was an opportunity for us to bring things together. The peace treaty lasted officially maybe a good couple weeks, and it kind of continued to dissolve as weeks and months went on, to the point to where it didn't exist no more. But for that little short time, it was great to have it. When gangster rap came out, it introduced a lot of cripping, a lot of Crips. And when NWA came out, which is the group that started gangster rap, Eazy-E, rest in peace, Eazy-E was known to be a Crip. And from him, you had other pioneer rappers that were from Crip neighborhoods. You had Snoop Dogg, you had Dub C, all these popular gang rappers that was in the neighborhoods representing their hoods that were blowing up on the mainstream. And so now you got people sitting at home watching MTV, 106 in Park. They're watching all these video shows, and they got these gang members doing rap videos with the blue rags and the six foes and the lowriders and wearing all the gang attire and the gang uniform, but they're actually artists making money on TV, and now it's being broadcast all over the world. Aside from the UK and the Netherlands, I've heard about Crips in China. I heard there's some Crips in Africa, which I've actually seen online, social media. People in Africa cripping and just loving this West Coast culture. And I think all these countries adapted on to these United States values and these United States ways just because of how it was glorified. Not really understanding the meaning of it. You know, that people lost their lives and people are killing. This is not something to play with. In 1994, I went to Oklahoma. I got a football scholarship to go to Oklahoma to play football. That's pretty much really what saved me from being killed or anything else bad happening to me on these LA streets. Played football there for 2 years at a historically black college. In 1996, 97, I moved to Oklahoma City, and I started working at the Juvenile Detention Center. They needed a gang advisor, a gang trainer. So of course I was qualified for that. Just volunteering my time, talking to the kids and, educating them on gangs and telling them because I had no idea Oklahoma had a gang problem. So I went and I sat down with the chief of police to see exactly, where did he want me to go with this. I did 2 years in the school system. They came to me and asked me that I want to interested into transferring to the streets, basically running traffic, pulling people over, writing tickets, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, let me do that. I'll do that. See what that's like. Cause I actually want to see how they dealt with drug dealers with me being on the other side of the law. And all the complaints that I had as a criminal, all the police brutality, all the mistreatment from the police, I got to witness that firsthand working with them. And a lot of times I would have to intervene on like, hold on, like, it was a couple of times where they had to have that conversation with me. Look, either you with us or you with them. So even in the training in the police academy, I dealt with racism. I dealt with discrimination because a lot of those officers felt like this dude is a criminal. This dude is from the streets. How in the hell are you guys gonna let him work with us? Blah, blah, blah. That's why even after I became a police officer and I moved back to California, I still ended up hooking back up with my old homies and old gang members, and I ended up going to jail. Even after being a police officer, I went to jail. My experience with the LAPD, they still haven't found a way to deal with communities and cultures that they don't know nothing about. It's the same tactics, dirty cops, bogus charges, planting drugs, mistreatment because of who you are or what you represent. It's the same thing. It hasn't stopped. The one way the police can bridge the gap with the community is to continue to work with those that want to work with them. Big U is example from Rolling 60s. Guys that like that are gang activists that are trying to do things to stop the gang violence and help kids in the community and bring some positivity in the community. The main thing is to save lives. And after you save lives, you want to create opportunities. I went to jail in Oklahoma for robbery. Since at that time when I was out there, it was for a robbery that I did when I was living in Oklahoma. When I came back to California in 2006, I went to jail again in 2009 for another robbery. And they ended up finding about another robbery that I did, and they combined the cases. I ended up taking the 3-year deal. When I first got arrested, they took me down to the main LAPD headquarters, what they call the Parker Center. They transfer you the next day to the county facility. So I left the Parker Center that morning. They put me on the jail bus, took me to the county jail, which is known as the Twin Towers. You usually go into the tank. The tank is basically a holding area where a whole bunch of other gang members are at. And I'm talking about mixed in, Crips, Bloods, Mexicans, everybody. And that's like a box of dynamite waiting to explode. And sometimes you get put in those situations and the officers just leave you and they don't care. Whatever happens in there, it happens. And you're gonna always find somebody in there that's gonna challenge you, especially if you're from a rival gang. You listen for the lingo, you listen to what they're saying. Or you might see people that you haven't seen since elementary and you lost contact with them, you wonder where they were at. Well, this is where they at. And so you find out that they from a Crip set. And so you guys just connect with one. Now, if it becomes a racial thing, Bloods and Crips, they find a way to unite against whatever race they have to go against. It can be some violence erupt in between the transportation into the different dorms or the different units. But for the most part, in the county jail, Crips was with Crips, Bloods with Bloods, or sometimes you get the general population where it's a mixed dorm. Now, don't get me wrong. If I went in there as a Menlo Crip or as a 60 Crip or 60 go in there and they run into some Hoovers, it's bad blood automatically. No matter we're Crips and we're Crips, we're in the same unit, it don't matter. We need to settle this beef. So I might walk in here and a Hoover Crip might say, hey, you from Menlo? I need that fade. So that lets you know that at some point, you and this guy have to fight because both of y'all sets don't get along. Inside or outside of prison with Crippin, there's no different. The way you carry yourself on the streets is the same way that you expected to carry yourself in the prison, except at a higher level because it's a little more dangerous in prison than it is on the streets. The thing that made me change my life was my kids. When I took the scholarship to the school, I was in the process of changing my life. I just didn't know it. But that was my start of changing my life. And when I started working with gangs and talking to the kids in the schools and at the juvenile jails, and I seen how I was getting through to them and how much they respected me from what I was telling them and trying to teach them, it just made me want to change. It just made me want to continue to do positive things. And that's what I've been doing ever since. I met somebody one day and they told me I had this look. They's like, you should get into acting. You should think about acting. So I started doing acting little gigs, doing extra roles. And so I've done several projects and been a part of several TV series and dramas and different things that have gotten my foot into the door of acting. So there's definitely some positivity that can happen from my past that was negative. Yeah.
Amanda Domingo Pellerano, former soldier of the Latin Kings. I used to run a drug trafficking network in New Orleans, and this is how crime works. So it was in 1995 when I got involved. It was because of the name, because of the weight that that name carried. When you said Latin Kings, they're like, oh, you know, they thinking like, man, don't play with him, like he's a Latin king. Initially is to uplift our people. This is not a gang, right? This is like an organization, just like you might have the Knights of Columbus. First, it would be a validation of who you were in the streets. Like you just couldn't come from anywhere and, hey, I want to be a Latin king. You know, like, who are you? You know, what type of work you put in? You know, who knows you? You know what I'm saying? Like, are you violent? You know what I'm saying? Like, things got to line up with this specific lifestyle. So when you have 2 or 3 people, they want you to be initiated. They'll have 5 men that jump you, beat you up in a circle, 2 to 3 minutes. How you handle that process allows you to know if you made the initiation to become a Latin king. I remember specifically when I got jumped in, I was 14, 15 years old. Man, it felt like the longest 3 minutes of my life. I thought they was giving me extra time. I'm like, what time is it? And it was like, it's only been 1 minute. I'm like, and I'm fighting for my life. But when you fall down, they don't stomp you out. They let you get back up and keep fighting. And that's part of the initiation, because if you just stay down, then you're not ready. Then when the time is up, it's all hugs and daps. Amor de rey, amor de rey. Everybody saying King Love, King Love, King Love. You a hug, and now we laughing about it. You feel a sense of worth. You feel like you have a sense of purpose. Like now you're a part of something that is so great. That you're a part of something that's bigger than you. You get in a gang, they give you a name. They change your name. They call me Paco. You know, I eventually turned into Paco, the Pope of the streets. And I became a slave to my own name. So whether if I had to kill you, if I had to steal from you, if I had to rob you, if I had to hurt you, you're not gonna shame this name, because my identity was in this name. And I went hard behind that name. So they had, you know, the Pee-wee when you first got in. That was the trial period, just to see, you know, your character, see if you're a man, if you're willing to fight, if you're willing to die, you know, like if you're ready for war. If you're a juvenile, you're a Pee-wee for 2 years, and then from there, a soldier, and then from a soldier, you could rise in ranks. So in the ranking, they had the first Inca president, you know, they had the vice president, they had the warlord, which is basically the enforcer, they had the council that would see, you know, it's just like a counselor, you know, somebody that had a lot of wisdom, a lot of knowledge that you would have access to. And then they had the treasurer that would control the finances to allocate where the funds would go. You know, so basically that was the chain of command. So the first Inca, you got to think Inca, power, you know what I'm saying? So that was a place, a position of authority. And the one that had rank over the New Orleans chapter in that period was Paco. And I think in New York, it was like King Blood. So there's some people that would not rise in ranks because they just simply didn't put in enough work or didn't take it seriously. And then there was cases where some people would get demoted, then somebody else would rise in that position. And there was instances where some people switched sides, and there was a green light on them that if they seen them like it smash on sight. I kind of like skipped the Pee Wee stage because I was doing things that soldiers was doing that Pee Wee shouldn't have been doing. When I was in prison, I had a guy, he was a Piru, he was a blood, and I was a king. So then we just joined it together and was able to run the whole compound. Now in that organization, I was the Inca, I was the crown, you know, like I was the president of that. And in blood, he was the vice president. And I took that from the prison to the streets and was really, that's where I just got into the drug trade, just really like, you know, transporting and just dealing with a lot. When you in poverty, you aspire to make money because you think money is gonna solve your problems. We would steal cars. We had the keys to the Camrys. We had the skeletons of the keys. You could just go unlock the car, just start it right up. You know, I was selling drugs, you know, and you know, I was robbing people. Like, and by any means necessary, whatever I had to do to get that money, I was getting it because I was deluded by my own vanity. It was whatever came along the way that you was able to get money and put your hands on, you would do. I used to run a drug trafficking network. One point in time, I was going to Houston to bring bricks back from the cartel. You know, we going out to Houston, $48,000 cash money. You know, it takes a long time to count 20s and 5s and 1s of 48,000. And then dealing with the clubs, you know, we would deal with the dancers, the strippers. Like, I give it to them wholesale to where they'll break it all the way down and they're making money off of that. So then I'm making money off of them, but they're making money too. They had a lot of strip clubs, like they had Visions. A lot of them was in New Orleans East. One of the clubs on Bourbon Street was just a club that we frequented where we would get the VIP section every time we were there, popping bottles, throwing money in the air. All of this a part of that life. But the more money I was making, the more money I was spending, the more money I was wasting. Because then I just think about how ignorant and foolish I was throwing money in there. I can remember everybody following us to go to the club, and I'm hanging out the window throwing money out the window on the interstate just so everybody could see money flying down the interstate. So when the Latin Kings started, like Chicago, it started in Chicago, which they deemed the motherland. So the Latin Kings was formed to uprise the Latin race so they could combat the influences that was around them based upon the Aryan Brotherhood and the other black gangster disciples and these other factions, you know, so it came together because they were being oppressed in that time. You know, it was a lot of Puerto Ricans and Mexicans, but then it was just anything from Latin descent, you know what I'm saying? Chicago, New York, those were the main chapters, Miami, you know, and then it, you know, filtered to Kenner, Metairie, New Orleans. And I remember just at the parades, you know, we would be over 100 deep at the parades. Every king, regardless of where you at, you know, you would fly those colors. You know, the gang signs were still the same. The signs that when they would throw up the crown, and every greeting would be they would dap up and they would touch the points of their hands to unite the crown, and they would bring the crown to their heart, tapping their heart, and they would say "Amor de Rey." They would throw that up. That's why I don't like still to this day, like people do that sign language as love, and I don't do it because to me that brings me back to that place. Like they would do that. They would touch the points. They would bring it and then bring it down. Like that ain't, you know what I'm saying? So it's a lot with that. But you know, the points, they stood for something. You know, like, and you gotta think, I'm thinking that in the mind of a child, because I was a child, like love, honor, respect, obedience, loyalty, like these are good attributes, right? The five-pointed crown is basically like the royalty. Like they go into the religion of kingism. The colors black and gold, the black symbolizing, you know, the darkness, the gold being the king out of the darkness, rising out of the darkness to uplift the people, you know. So the 5 points in love, honor, respect, obedience, loyalty, you know, in other factions, it was righteousness, you know, that was added into there. And then they would have a tattoo, you know, where they have a crown, a five-pointed crown, or they have 5 points. I got 5 points up here. I got the five-pointed crown right here. I got the five-pointed star coming all up here. That's how you could identify one another. You would see that on the arm. You would know that's a king. They had Bank Street Posse. They had Hoover, 31st Hoovers. They had Folks. and Crips. All of that was rivals. And that's why basically the Latin Kings and the Bloods ride under the five, under the People's Nation, because they have the same rivals. When you think about gangs in California and Chicago, like everything was segregated within blocks, within demographics. So this block banged this, so you knew not to go on that block if you was part of a different sect, right? So that was based upon demographics, you know, and then also it's territorial, you know, so like who's gonna run this territory? So if you're selling drugs in this territory, this other section can't come in and make money on your street because this is your street. You had a force behind you. It was like a machine, you know what I'm saying? Like, this is what you're doing, and these people are here to help validate that. Like I said, in the street life, when you in the streets, you need street cred. When you in the streets, you need to have power behind you. If not, the jungle creed states the strong must feed on any prey at hand. I was branded a beast and sat at the feast before I was even a man. That's a creed that they go by. Is taking, you know, I want it, I'm gonna get it. And if you wanna go to war, we can go to war. You know, it's just not having no concern, no appreciation for life. It was all about you. You gotta think, you're in New Orleans, you're in the murder capital. So obviously you're gonna carry a gun because people are not always fighting, right? So then you would take situations as they come. If it's a fight, let's get in a fight. But if you pull out a weapon, I'm not gonna let you kill me. So I need to have a weapon. You don't go to a gunfight with a knife, right? And you just had to be ready for whatever came. There's consequences to actions, right? Because there's a certain manifesto in the Constitution that you're to honor and live by. Think about the points that I talked about: love, honor, respect, obedience, loyalty, obedience, right? So when you're dealing with streets, you're dealing with rebellion. So anytime people are in a state of rebellion, there must be built-in pressures. There has to have rule, there has to have order. You wasn't supposed to touch nobody's girlfriend. You know, even sisters, like family was off limits. Homosexuality, that was not permitted. No, it was once a king, always a king. So there was no walking away. When you leave, you had to go through a protocol so you could leave. You paid dues also, and there was no running. Another rule was one moves, all moves. So basically, if we together and I pop off, you better pop off too. And if you don't, then you're gonna have a violation. Now, when we have a meeting, you're gonna get beat up for that. So you either take the beating with everybody else, or you're gonna take it aside. When I was a part of it, like even the guy, he would tell everybody to turn around. Like nobody was to take pleasure in seeing their brother get beaten. You know, like it wasn't entertainment. It's certain degrees of it. There's certain infractions that will enable you to get a violation and you proceed to move forward. But there were certain infractions to where you would have a green light and it would be smashed on sight. Like, that's it, you're out of here. You're not a part of this, you'll never be a part of this again. And if they see you, it's up. The religious aspect of the Latin Kings is the gravitation towards the linguistics. Oh, you talking about amor de rey. All right, Jesus Christ is the King of all kings. So when you think of rey, you think of king. Amor, you think of love. God is love. How can this be bad, right? The Bible says we're chosen generations, a royal priesthood. That's kings. The initiation process to be jumped in, they would call it the baptism. We would have meetings, they would call it mass, and we would meet in a cemetery. Think about that, right? But we would meet in the cemetery, and then the New Orleans chapter and the Kenneth chapter. Now, basically, they had the same manifesto, the same constitution from Chicago. So when we would have meetings, they would open up in prayer. Everybody would get on their knees, put their head down, they'd open up in prayer, and they will address certain things that were going on. This is what needs to be handled. This is what needs to be seen at. This is what needs to be done in this area, in this area. I would put my money in the basket, in the hat, you know what I'm saying, as a part of my dues, and that was supposed to go to other kings that were incarcerated or to look out for everybody else, you know. But ultimately, I don't know where that went. You know what I'm saying? We didn't meet as much as they probably should have. When I was in prison and I joined the Latin Kings with the Bloods because they both run under the People's Nation. They both ride under the 5. We would meet on the big yard. And when we meet on the big yard, it would be to address what needs to be done, any new recruits, you know what I'm saying? What's going on in this dorm? Where's this money going? When's this coming in? We rewritten up and make sure everybody's gonna abide by this so we can have a structure and we could run this yard. The connection between the Latin Kings on the streets and the ones in jail is based upon influence. If you're just a peewee or you just a soldier, 9 times out of 10, you're not gonna see a penny. Unless it's your close comrades that was running with you head up. The Latin Kings to be dominant in the prison was based upon recognition of you being about that. You already having a name and you proving yourself in that prison. So when things came your way, you would handle it with violence. You'd be ready for violence at any given time. You would form connections within the prison based upon your street connections to really get influence on the guards. Now you got influence on the guards, you have access to things of the world. The more people I would have, I understand chain of command. I understand how an organization works. So at this point, I'm coming in at a high level. So this was based upon my security because I wouldn't really be touching this stuff, but I would capitalize off of it. So the more people, the more structure I have, so the less things I have to do putting myself in jeopardy because I have people under me that I could say, look, go do this, go do that, move this, and then I reap the benefits of it. So then I started going to war with the tactical. By this time I'm on extended, I'm bored. I have nothing better to do. All right, let's fight. Let's fight, let's go to war. I'm gonna get respect from my comrades, other prisoners, and then on top of that, you get the respect from the correctional officers, because now they know if you mess with him, you're not gonna be able to go home at shift change because you're gonna have so much paperwork that you gotta do. You would have been here 10 hours, 12 hours. You might not make it home for 17 hours if you mess with this prisoner. So guess what they do? They stop messing with you. For me, prison, it made me worse. I didn't get saved in prison. The only thing I got from prison is how to be a better criminal. Man, my breaking point, bro, I didn't care about the fighting. I didn't, like, pain don't last long, you know what I'm saying? It was really my kids, man. When I did that 5-year bid and my little girl Haley, she was 2 years old when I went. I had been locked up like 4 years and I was on maximum security. This instant, the officer that was working the dorm, he was cool with me, so he's working visit this day and he lets me hold my little girl even though I'm non-contact. I got a belt, I got handcuffs, and I got shackles. I'm holding my beautiful baby girl. She's like, Daddy, what is this? I said, that's my bracelet, baby. Daddy shining. You don't see they brand new? And she looks and she said, well, what is this? And she grabs my shackles and I start doing like this. And I'm making them jump like a jump rope. I was like, oh, that's my jump rope, baby. And she looks, she said, you look stuck. You look like you stuck. I told you prison didn't make me better. I'm about to start this empire when I hit the streets. But all of this stuff was breaking me. So getting out, for me, it wasn't even a thought because I didn't care, like, what they would do or what they was gonna say. I started going up here 12, 13. It was stealing clothes and selling them on the block, you know, and then possession of a stolen weapon. They kicked my mama's door in and they found the gun. Then we was all at a parade. We was going to fight another rival gang. We had an 8-ball and a bandana. We had one other guys had a knife, you know. So, but man, God intervened. We ended up getting caught smoking weed in the car before we could get out and do what we was going to do. Then 16, 1 count of first-degree attempted murder, 3 counts of aggravated assault, 1 count of aggravated criminal damage. It was gang-related. You know, got locked back up, and I was in there 17, and I got a 5-year suspended sentence. Then I ended up getting charged as an adult. I was on the streets 2 years, and then I got locked back up. I came home 26, 27. I got locked back up 28, 29. I come home 30, 31. Then 32, I overdosed on heroin for the third time. I was dead on the floor. And I say, the paramedics, awesome, they did their job, but they didn't bring me back. He brought me back because I got a purpose. It's like I didn't care about my life. I'm putting myself in jeopardy. You living that life not knowing that you hurting everybody that loves you in the process. When I overdosed on heroin, I ended up getting sentenced to the church, mandated by the court with a suspended sentence saying, if he gets kicked out, if he leaves, we vacate the sentence, take him back to trial on the initial charge and multi-bill him. So it's either complete this 1-year discipleship rehabilitation program or go do 15, 30 years in prison. I went because I'm like, I'm going to face this. I said, Paco's dead. I'm a new creation in Christ. That's where Rebirth come from. I'm in the process of opening up a facility to where we rehabilitate men and we disciple men. Some people look at me and be like, you're a pastor? Well, what's a pastor supposed to look like? Older men need to take accountability to be there for the younger men. They want to see you love them. You got to give your time to this younger generation. Don't just tell them what they need to do. Show them what they need to do, right? So how are you going to do that? By proximity. By inconveniencing yourself and going into these neighborhoods, going into the projects. I go hood to hood, block to block, prison to project, to juvenile facilities, and I share my testimony and I make it tangible because I make myself transparent. I don't get cleaned up like I never been dirty. So I used to rap for the world. I opened up for Kevin Gates, opened up for VH1 Living Hip Hop. I had a beat from Manny Fresh with Manny Fresh on the chorus with Cash Money Records. I got a new single out with my wife and Sister Roxy Comeda, that's part of the worship team. It's called Amazing Grace. It's like a 2023 rendition. Like it's no coincidence. Like I'm here talking about God's amazing grace. You know what I'm saying?
My name is Alex Sanchez. I was involved with MS-13, and this is how crime works. Gang violence comes in all shapes and forms. I ended up going to prison. I got shot at. I got deported. The crimes that I committed took me to a place that's ugly, but I learned and came out strong. I came to the United States in 1979 and experienced a culture shock and then a culture clash with other ethnic groups, especially even Mexican, amongst Latino groups. I started seeking ways in which to defend myself. And in middle school, I was introduced to the Mara Salvatrucha Stoners, 13. The initiation into the gang, it always is through a beating. They call it jumping in English, or in Spanish, brincado, which is getting beaten up, right, by 4 or more people. This is part of what you expect if in the warfare is that you will get beat up. You will suffer violence, right? And that's the initiation of getting jumped in, is violence. I ended up joining what's called the Normandy Locals clique. Initially, it was all about protection, being there for each other. It was 7 of us, 2 women and 5 guys, and we were all homeless. Shortly thereafter, we have our first friend that was killed. We call him Rocky from the Normandy Locals clique, and that basically brought in this element of vengeance, of getting back to those that hurted us. Around 85, 86, there was an influx of weapons coming into the United States, especially Los Angeles, with the crack epidemic. It was the first time you saw the Uzi, the AK-47. MS-13 didn't have the funds to get those type of weapons. So for us, the cheapest thing that we could use was the machete. It was something culturally relevant to us. It was a tool for harvesting in our country. And eventually we were known as a gang that used the machete in gang warfare. We would go and fight in rumbles in the park, in the street. You know, some of us would carry knives. Back in the day, a chain, right? I myself got arrested for crimes carrying a concealed weapon. You know, I was on my way to shoot somebody and I got stopped by the police and they found a gun. I would say divine intervention, I don't know. I probably would have killed somebody or probably would be in prison doing life like many of the folks that I go see. The violence that I used was the way that I used to release that pain that I felt inside. I was that angry boy and I became an angry man. And it took me a long time to realize that I can make a change. I had tattoos on my body, on my fingers, on my arms. I ended up getting 3 dots, which was like La Vida Loca, the crazy life. Then I ended up getting the gang name tattooed across my chest. For more traditional gangs, they would put their gang name or a girlfriend's name on their eyebrows. But to start getting tattooed all your face for the MS-13 was something different. The more tattoos you had on is the more committed you were to letting people know that I'm here, I'm in your face. I went through the painful process of getting tattoo removal. You know, it was difficult for me because I felt like a coward doing it, that I was letting go of so many things that I have done and things that I believed in, but that was part of the process. You know, the relationship that MS-13 with the Barrio 18th Street goes way back to the 80s. We, for the most part, were in the same blocks as their neighborhood was, but we also maintained close relationship. It was mostly because the 18th Street neighborhood in the area was composed from a lot of immigrants, mostly Central American and Salvadoran. But in 1992, Shaggy from the Western Locals was shot and killed by members of the 18th Street. And that's what severed the relationships. Many people started dying, primarily because everybody knew each other's hideouts. 18th Street was a lot bigger than MS-13, still is in the area. And so they were more connected with other gangs as well. It brought in other Chicano neighborhoods to target us. I got called in and said, hey, Alex, be ready because you can't, trust them anymore because they're going to want to kill you guys. It was a cruel war. It was a difficult war. There have been points where they're like being called like a temporary truce and whatnot, especially in El Salvador, but also in 1993 in Los Angeles, there was a truce amongst all the Latino gangs that actually reduced violence, but the violence has not gone back to the levels we saw prior to 1993. Hay muchos motos que han salido desde el inicio de la pandilla, como la Mara con Machete. Esta de Mata Viola es solo una manera en cual la pandilla demuestra temor. Sin embargo, las pandillas no necesariamente usan esas cosas como para ejercer este control. Digamos, en California, por seguro, está prohibido las violaciones. Alguien que cae por algo así, lo matan adentro o lo tratan de matar, ¿verdad? Las otras pandillas o la misma pandilla. If you just live on the sides and do what you're told and represent the neighborhood well, then, you'll be okay. If you break the rules, right, then there is punishment. There are some that are judged to death, especially those that collaborate with law enforcement, those that become snitches or tell on their brothers. But I have not seen that there's like a a task force of gang members that are going around and looking at every address that you lived in to go target you and kill you. Most of the time, folks that die that way are because they come back to the block. MS-13 is known as Mara Salvatrucha. You can say MS-13, MS, La Mara, right? You can have different references to it, even alluding to like the garra or the claw, which is the gang sign, right? Well, you have the devil's horn, the two fingers that is used to also in the heavy metal rock scene. People have transformed it. They put both hands to make an M or S and so on. MS-13 or MSS-13 during the time was into that heavy metal scene. Whether it was Slayer, Iron Maiden, or Megadeth, that music really was how we let out. It wasn't that we were evil devil worshipers. There were some individuals within the gang structure that were into La Santa Muerte, for instance. You have people from all denominations in the gang. Some people that believe in Christ. So it's a community overall. That's what you call the barrio. So in some ways, being in the gang, is like being some sort of religion. In 86, I ended up getting arrested and went to Central Juvenile Hall. Once you're in prison, you have to defend yourself, and you're known by other rival gang members as somebody that stood up for himself. So it became a rites of passage to rise up through the ranks like that. Eventually, I made it to prison in 1991, and went back to prison at least 3 times. And in 1994, I ended up getting deported. After 12 years of a civil war, the war was over in El Salvador. So many people were getting deported. My first thought was, I'm going to start fresh. I don't have a criminal record. I speak English, so maybe I could get into the tourist business or something to that nature, right? I wasn't planning on going over there and gangbanging or getting caught up or dying down there. But that changed immediately once I got to the airport. As I was going to the terminal, I saw the gang riding on the hillside, and it said MS-13. But as we go down the highway, I ended up seeing on the wall, on the brick wall, the Roman numerals XVIII, which means 18th Street. And then I realized, wow, they're here too, so the rivalry must continue. And I started to looking around and being more alert as to where I was at and who was beside me. So shortly after arriving in El Salvador, I ended up getting death threats. A death squad came out called the Sombra Negra, or the Black Shadow, and their mission was to eradicate the gang violence that was rising. I had 2 people with me, 2 gang members that were young. They had been child soldiers in the war, and they were looking up to me. I had 2 grenades, and I gave them to them. I've never used a grenade, and I said I'd probably blow myself up. But these 2 guys, they know how to use a grenade. So I carried my gun, and they carried the grenades. And that's how we went to different places, because I was under the threat that I could be killed or shot at or even try to be kidnapped from these death squads. The level of violence was probably quadruple from whatever I had experienced in the United States. And that was residue from the war. So you would see gang members, using that type of in-your-face violence, that was used during the war. I couldn't go to my home anymore, so I was on the run. I ended up eventually deciding to flee El Salvador because I felt death around me. Coming up as another immigrant, I got kidnapped in Oaxaca by the Federales and almost died in the desert and crossing Matamoros into Brownsville, Texas. So I have this knowledge of tragedy of what I saw of other migrants coming up all the way from South America. It's not something that I would wish on anyone. To be targeted kidnapped, held for ransom, and possibly killed just for coming into the United States. But the desperation of what our countries go through, forces people to have to put themselves in such an ordeal. The only place that I could go back was to my old block. I was tired of going to prison. I was tired of a life of violence and looking over my back. And I was able to talk to the neighborhood, and they gave me a pass because they seen that I was working and taking care of business, and I kind of still lived in the block, but I wasn't getting involved in none of their gang activities. There is in a specific, I would say, leadership structure, but it's whoever feels that void in that moment in the neighborhood where there's no clear individual. Most of the time, nobody really wants to take a leadership of a gang because you become a prime target by law enforcement. They're not a secret group of people that are trying to make millions and millions of dollars. They're disorganized structures that work on what crimes they could benefit from. In Central America, Honduras, Guatemala, you have individuals that might take on, into a criminal entity such as, being part of a cartel or getting involved in human trafficking. But it's not something that's a direct goal of the gang to be something like that. So what El Salvador has done right now with creating the biggest prison in the continent, in the smallest country in the continent, is that it fits over 40,000 people. In a place called Tecoluca, the prison is called Secot, and they have been transferring all these people there that they have designated as gang members to be incarcerated for life. These individuals will never set foot out of those prisons, but in a coffin. And that's what their message has been from the president. We have seen this before. El Salvador has had zero tolerance initiatives with the Cero Tolerancia, Mano Dura initiatives that created mass incarceration, and it didn't reduce violence. This prison is basically going to be holding all these people that have been judged unjustly based on just their affiliation. They're being sentenced to life in prison. In the history of mass incarceration, especially in California, that has over 33 prisons, this has been a failure in regards to reducing violence. So we know that mass incarcerating people is not going to bail us out of the problems that created all this problem in the first place. At this moment, we have the military of El Salvador tackling the problem. They're arresting, they're on the streets, they have roadblocks in every other mile, to see who goes by. You have local police, the National Civil Police, but you also have underground organizations such as the death squads, the exterminators that they call themselves. Before it was the Black Shadow. Now is these exterminadores that are social cleansing groups that target specific people for assassination, basically. So I think that politicians really need to start thinking, what is the exit strategy out of this mass incarceration and having the country militarized as they do right now, and start really focusing also in the prevention piece that has always been neglected by every politician, every presidency before that. The Mara Salvatrucha started in the late 70s into the early 80s in what's considered the Koreatown Pico Union area of Los Angeles. And it started because of the mass migration of immigrants coming from Central America, unaccompanied minors and children who came here and suffered this culture clash with different ethnicities, right? The migration flow started impacting other states into like Long Island, in the 2000s, the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, places like Houston, Texas, where there's a big Salvadoran community. And in the United States, prison became part of that, of the continuation of engagement of the gang. It didn't stop the gang by incarcerating all these people, but it influenced the gang now to grow and connect. Once the war ended in El Salvador, the government of the United States started mass deporting people to not only El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. And that's what started the expansion of MS-13 in those countries. Homies Unidos started in El Salvador in 1996 by members of gangs that have been deported to El Salvador. Many of the members, I knew them from the neighborhood, from the gang, or I had done time in prison with them. They invited me to a conference in Santa Cruz, and that's how we started creating programs in the Pico Union and in Koreatown initially. It wasn't easy in the beginning. We really didn't have the trust of law enforcement. In 2000, I became part of the Rampart scandal, which they had arrested a gang unit officer stealing kilos of cocaine out of the evidence room. And then he flipped, and then he told about all the crimes that the gang unit was committing, things that we were saying that they were doing in the courtrooms, but the jury didn't believe us over a cop. I became part of the Rampart scandal behind being a key witness, an alibi for a 14-year-old kid that was being charged with murder, in which he was at the church during our program during the time that the murder took place. So it couldn't have been him. And that's when the same officers that arrested him came after me, and they arrested me for the sole purpose of turning me over to immigration to be deported. So that developed into this new scandal within immigration during the time and the police of how they used immigration as a tool to get rid of people they didn't want around. And then eventually I was released and won political asylum in 2002. But the LAPD had not forgotten me and were not happy that I sued them, right? And they settled. And in 2009, they came after me again. They put me in a federal RICO case. The charges were dismissed, and I was able to restart again because Homies Unidos lost everything. We lost the office, we lost the funding, we lost the staff. So I, organized again, and now, we have 11 staff, doing a lot of work in the community. Having been part of that myself, it's like, I know that I'm on a hit list, on a target list by the federal government, the LAPD, and they're just looking for ways in which they can get me indicted. So I have to walk a thin line everywhere I go. I have to watch everything I say. Well, the media has really given a lot of publicity to the MS-13 gang. That comes down through the state, especially when you have a president that directly names a particular gang like MS-13 and the repercussions that has behind it. Because once a president mentions something, it's telling their departments to go after this particular group. MS-13 is one of the most vulnerable gangs to go after because they're targeted by the immigration rhetoric, the bad hombre. One individual commits a crime, it's in every newspaper. While other gangs such as the Crips, the Bloods, 18th Street, the Latin Kings, who in some cases are bigger than the MS-13, are not have coverage like this one because they're mostly either Puerto Rican or Mexican American or African American, which makes them U.S. citizens. And nothing feeds gangs as labeled them as the world's most dangerous, as the city's most dangerous. The mayor, Antonio Villaraigosa, at one point said that they put out a list of the top 10 worst gangs in Los Angeles, and every gang wanted to be part of it. It was like, hey, I'm dangerous too. So it creates the system of trying to see which gang is number one, and every gang wants to be number one. You get to a point where you get tired of being chased by the police. You get tired, of being called by your mother and saying, hey, I'm raising your children. When are you going to raise your own children? So you start trying to figure out, like, I'm getting too old for this, or I want to be more responsible. People age out. People, some of them become Christians. Some of them, try to study and get a degree or something and start their own businesses. You have many, many gang members from MS-13 that are pastors that have turned their lives around and now they're preaching. I'm still called a gang member, right? And I say, well, I am. I am part of it. I work in those communities, so I am. I cannot say that I'm not longer a gang member because that's how society has labeled me, that I'm a gang member for life. But am I a gang member that's calmed down? Yes. I'm somebody that's looking out, helping out now the children of many of my friends that are in prison. Yes. In my life, I've done a lot of things, a lot of good things, but also bad things. And I regret those things that I've done. But what I'm doing is trying to give back to the community what I once took. The organization, Homies Unidos, we're not stopping gangs. We're reducing violence. Law enforcement is incarcerating them. We're trying to save as many as we can by helping them once they're ready to do their lives. Having a nonprofit, you don't have that, 2-bedroom, 2-story house with a pool. No, you're not gonna have those things. I'm able to support myself and my family in the little, humble place that I have. That's not even mine, I'm renting. But I think that a nonprofit always struggling with day-to-day cost. We'll love to have folks that are well off, that have the funding, be able to give us what we need to expand.
My name is Omar Sharif. I was formerly involved in gang activity in London, and this is how crime works. I was involved in gangs from 2005 until 2011. I'm grateful that I'm still alive, although I've come very close to losing my life inside of gangs. I've had a bunch of knives put to my neck, stomach. I've been stabbed twice in my right leg. I've had guns put to me. The structure of a gang is almost like being in employment. Okay, you have the newbies that come involved, you then have management, you then have senior management. I got involved in a gang when I was around 13 years old, actually from selling sweets in school. I was approached one day by someone who said, how would you like to make more money? And initially I knew what he was talking about. I was scared, but when he started mentioning things about, you can be a man, you can provide for help your parents at home. And when you come from a council flat estate and, sometimes things are not easy, that kind of languaging is enough to make you say, well, okay, can I actually do this? When you join at the age that I did, you're considered a younger. A younger is the street soldier. A younger is the person who just gets employed into the gang. As part of the gang initially as a younger, were to hold certain things, were to make deliveries, were to be on call. You're told where to go, what to do, not to look into bags, not to look into boxes. It's just, you're a yes man. And we look up to our elders. So our elders are the people that we aspire to be. The ones that have the money, at the time they had the Gucci belts, the Rolexes, the gold teeth, the nice cars. In a gang, the older is not always in charge, but he is almost like middle management. So he takes control of what gets moved in and out of the area, who's selling what on certain streets, money management, distribution, and he or she, it can be a she as well, they'll have the connections to the people at the top. So it's kind of like a chain of command. So they're the ones who normally even groom people into a gang. They're the ones who, when things go a bit sour and people get, hit on, beaten up, sometimes kidnapped, sometimes threatened, it's the elders that they call. But I know from experience that even the elders who we looked up to, they are speaking to people above them. I've seen people who are above the elders who look nothing like us, who don't sound like us at all. I can guess the jobs that they do, and they are very embedded into society, which was quite an eye-opener for me because I thought even as a young black guy in London, it's only guys like me that do this kind of stuff. But actually, we're just their foot soldiers. So even our elders who we wanted to become, they're still the S-man for someone else. The people who are above our elders in the gang, the highest on the hierarchy, from what I understood, this couple, they were massive on the real estate scene in the UK. They were not involved in themselves in the dirty work, but a lot of the money that went going into their businesses came from the money that a lot of the foot soldiers, the youngers like myself, will be making and passing up the food chain. It's scary to think that when you go to a bank, or you're speaking to a lawyer, or you're walking into Greater London and you're talking to someone that's quite high up in business, for example, they have interesting habits on the side or hobbies on the side, because I've seen it with my own eyes. The way that street gangs make their money here in London, there are things like kidnappings, there are hits where someone wants someone to be hurt or killed. But the most common way, which I'd say is what you hear of or see most of day to day, is by selling drugs. Gangs normally have things called trap houses or bandos. Trap houses are places where drugs will be sold from, where they could be stored, weapons. Gang members will be living there or looking after the place, for example. And these are acquired in a number of ways. So these could be places where squatters have been for a while. It could be someone else's home that belongs to the gang. And these are safe spots for the gang. So if anything happens, we'll get a call saying, right, meet us at the trap house. We know where that is. The address is never texted over a phone. It's never spoken over a phone. It's always told, verbally, so there's no trace as to where it could be. And if they're in the area the gang belongs to, the police immediately will make a connection. Gang wars can start over the smallest things or the biggest things. Smallest things could be they were at a club or a rave, and from there someone gets stabbed, and then it's a whole, we need to retaliate, we need to send a message, we need to show them who we are. So they round up everyone, and then it's now not just one person versus one person, it's actually a gang versus gang, postcode versus postcode, and now we're talking 50 to 100 people plus. It got to a point where we were having postcode wars, meaning it was my block, NW1 versus NW5. These gang wars started because people started to become greedy. People were looking for power, people were looking for just to be significant, and also people wanted to rise up. Postcode wars are also named interstate wars. This is something that started even in the 60s, 70s, which areas became smaller or bigger, and it's a way of protecting territory. Now there are things called block wars, estate wars, which are even within the same postcode. There is such rivalry, there is such demand for who is more important. So it goes from area, postcode, now to blocks, which creates further division. Years ago, it seemed there to be more of a reason as to why they're going to war, because something big happened. Even recently, I was mentoring about 10 young boys from a school, and one of them said to another one something offensive about his mum. That spilled out from school, and because it was filmed and put on social media, one of them actually ended up getting stabbed. There was a video of around, to me, like 60 people having a fight. I could see weapons, I saw machetes coming out. What are they fighting over? Essentially, it's nothing, really. Those fights are not happening over drugs, not happening over a threat from someone outside. It's just two male egos that can't have a conversation, and it has to result in violence, and then sometimes even death. Although guns are easy to source, knives are still the bigger problem. We hear more deaths happening from knives than gunshots, for sure. Maybe because the laws around knives aren't that regulated, because they say if you carry a knife, you go to prison for 4 years, but then I hear people getting 3, 4, 5 warnings. So people aren't really taking the law seriously. And nowadays, when you hear about someone being stabbed, it's a younger against a younger. Olders don't get involved with stuff like that. And these youngers are not going to be able to get a hold of a gun unless they steal it from someone or steal it from the trap house, for example. For any under 18-year-old to get a knife, it's as easy as going onto Amazon and clicking something for next day delivery, and it gets delivered. It's not regulated. I know even on Snapchat, there are accounts on Snapchat every day where they say, hey, we have 5 machetes, we have 5 army knives with knuckle dusters attached to it. Who wants this? I've seen axes with chains. Why are they making these things? Why are they not asking for proof of ID? Some websites might say you must be over 18 to buy this. That has never deterred anyone under 18 to say, okay, ooh, I shouldn't do this. They don't know that by making that sale and then delivering it to that house, that young person goes and kills someone here. They're part of that cycle, but they're so far attached from that. In the UK, there is a law around carrying a knife around the size of the blade itself being less than 3 inches. It has to be foldable, and you shouldn't be carrying it for the wrong reasons. I've been stopped and searched before, and sometimes I did have a knife on me, but I did have a foldable knife, and I wasn't in a state of anger. So the guy said to me, actually, if he caught me and I was in a state of anger, then he would have arrested me. And that made me realize, actually, they don't have a correct way of policing this, because I knew so many guys who would carry bigger blades than that, ones that you can't fold. And they'd be walking with those on high streets, for example. I've never heard of someone going to prison for carrying a knife. So I grew up in Marylebone, which essentially is a very, very nice area. However, there is a division, because there's one side of Marylebone where you have very nice mansions and nice flats with nice cars. That's not where I lived. I lived on the other side. I lived on the other side where it's council flats, it's block towers. Even though it's on our doorstep, we're brought up with a mindset and a belief system that we're not good enough for that. It's easy for anyone to be interested in joining a gang for many reasons. For young people, normally it's to do with money. The other main reason is that belonging. It's having a family, having that brotherhood, a sisterhood. We don't go to private schools, right? We go to just public schools, and that's where it all starts. I didn't run to a gang and say, hey, I want to be in your gang to make money. I tried to go down the proper route. You know, I borrowed some clothes to go to interviews. I applied for 50 jobs when I left school, and no one said yes to me. If society is not allowing me to make money in this way, but there's a lifestyle which could, where do I go? The first thing they do is befriend you, is they welcome you in, so they make you feel a part of a family. The second thing is to spoil you somehow. You know, if they know you need money, they give you some money. If they know you're hungry, you get some food. Then they test you somehow. They may ask you to hold something for them. They may ask you to be somewhere at a certain time. And normally they've set something up to get you robbed on purpose. They set you up in some way to see what you say, because that's them checking in on, ooh, can we trust this person? It's really bad the way they make you trust them and actually love them as a family, but you're just a pawn in a bigger game. In a gang, it's almost like putting together a fantasy football team. Different strengths. Someone could be fast, someone could be a good driver, someone could be a good fighter, someone could stab and not care about it, someone could steal. So when they recruit for a gang, I would say there are qualities that they look for. The number one thing they look for is loyalty, but they also look at how can they strengthen the gang? What can that person bring to the table? New gang members are recruited on a geographical basis. So the local recruitment is, I think, the priority for a gang, because they need to have numbers high. They need to have a certain amount of people on road doing certain things, a certain amount of people moving, distributing, managing. So in the UK, we have something called county lines. This is where a lot of the inner city gangs, there's no more territory. Everything's been divided up. So they're now thinking, right, how can we expand? So county lines are where these gangs want to operate in smaller towns, smaller cities, rural areas, and they normally use young people for this. So you may have heard of a term going OT, which is going out of town, and they're facilitated by the elders. So the elders would have someone in place who may live in a smaller town. They may have someone who has a farmhouse somewhere, train tickets, everything is paid for the young person. They're given a budget, they're given money for lunch and things like that. They'll tell them to dress how they dress. Normally, they'll give them a backpack, say, look, don't open the backpack, here's the address, go here, wait here, or call this number, for example. The whole point of doing that is so that police will say, well, it's a young person, we don't have to search them. I think in some way the UK is influenced by the US, not just on the rap scene. I know the drill scene came out, but also there's always a bit of competition. For example, the USA, the Bloods versus Crips, that also came here in the UK, and that was a massive scene for a while. There was a period where it just became colours. So there was just the bandana, which represented which color, which gang you're from. That's really why we started to see, music videos become more grimy. We started to see more killings. We started to see more weapons on the street. So in the US, we have gangs like BMF and GD who've been going on for 30 years plus, Latin Kings. I feel that in the UK, gangs are more divided. Here in the UK, you can have an estate, a block, and even within that block, it's divided, block, from block to block, street to street. That's what I experienced, and nowadays, I'm sure it's even worse. So the main difference for me is the size of the operation, but also it seems that they have more stability and more structure in the way that it creates longevity. I believe social media plays a massive role in the rise of gang violence because of the exposure that they get. I've interviewed a young person in prison, and he said the reason why he killed the people he's killed is because of songs that he'd listened to. He said he wanted to recreate that in real life. And I'm focused on young people because they're the vulnerable ones. They're the ones who aren't able to make a decision for themselves yet. I know for sure that there's going to be some collateral damage from these things, because when you listen clearly, if you can understand what they're saying in these drill songs, it's scary. What's allowed to be sold and listened to publicly and shared on radios, for example, because young people will listen to that and they want to replicate that because they think, okay, he is now my role model, my idol. For me to be deemed as someone successful, I need to do what he's doing. For children to avoid being targeted for gangs, it comes down to discipline for me. It's really understanding what you're getting yourself into. I think the way gangs are policed nowadays, it's difficult because it made me feel so embarrassed, to be stopped and searched in front of my mum, and, she cried at home saying, why do they think my son is this kind of person? And I hated seeing her upset. But if I put their hat on, I think, right, well, if we stop and search everyone that looks like the criteria or stereotype, we could find another weapon and take it off the streets. For me, that's the wrong approach because not everyone who looks a certain way belongs in that stereotype. I think stop and search should be reviewed as a policy because if you find one young person and he's carrying a knife that's under 3 inches long that is foldable, they'll take it away, slap on the wrist, have a good day. Next day, he'll go find exactly the same knife from somewhere else, carry it again. Instead of creating or deepening that hate, you should try and create a relationship by doing things like going into schools. I've always said that you need to speak their language. If you want to police them, sit down and talk to them. A brother of a friend of mine, a while back, he was caught on the streets. He didn't have a lot of drugs on him, but he had enough, and he was arrested and went to prison for a short while. If someone said to him, hey, listen, we know what you're doing out here. How about we offer you an opportunity to earn money with us, or we'll find you a job? And you've got to think of it like this. Prison is a business. Every single person that gets put into prison, someone's getting paid. It's a good deterrent for some people because some people might take that as a lesson, saying, well, I know a friend of mine was carrying something and got arrested. I shouldn't do it too. But for the most people, it's not enough. In prison, there's more going on there than on the streets. And this is what we don't hear about on the news. There's people dying in prisons. The gangs are still doing the same thing in prison. I believe wealth inequality definitely contributes towards gang activity, gang violence. The way these gangs make their money, and also from personal experience, is through drugs, predominantly. If 90% of the money comes from drugs and you make it legalized, one thing can happen, that there's going to be too much demand for it. So either the gangs will start fighting even more because now they've got an open market, for example, or it could destabilize them because the second that companies here, pharmaceutical companies, will start getting involved and they're massive players. That will completely eliminate the gangs. So will they have money to buy weapons? Will they have money to even fund gang wars anymore? It probably wouldn't happen. For many young people who carry knives, one of the reasons, and one of my initial reasons, was because we feel unsafe, or we've heard about people being stabbed and we want to be able to protect ourselves. I don't think there's a quick fix to trying to make a young person feel safe. The way to solve the issue and deter them from it isn't by fear, because that doesn't work. It's by re-educating them on the consequences of these things. And I say giving people an opportunity, showing people more love. These people that are involved in gangs, they did everything they did because they wanted to feel love from people. They didn't get love from home. They didn't get that affection at home. But when they did something, the gang showed them a respect, and that's what drew them in even deeper. One thing I know that's changed over the years, and that would still help other people feel safe in gang-led areas, is the presence of youth centres. And these were places where you could have rival gangs come to the same building, make music together, play pool together, play basketball together, and it was a place of safety. When you have something that you're passionate about and have something that you care about, it removes the amount of time you spend with the gang. It removes the amount of time you spend on the streets. Schools do have a big part to play in gang culture, and it works both ways, because I've seen how if you have a school that's in the middle of 3 areas that are having a war, for example, then you have a big issue, because then you have, just like in prison, you have gang activity happening at school. It will take a community approach to remove or reduce, gang violence and gang activity, but I think it has to be a complete united front from all levels of society. If I had to look at London gangs 10 years from now, I can see the problem becoming deeper. I can see a culture which is being even more embedded into society. I think London gang culture will become almost like a standard for other gangs and other countries. There are young people who don't look at the seriousness of this. They will see it as it's cool. They will see it as it's a thing to be, just like I did when I was young. So yeah, 10 years from now is a scary place, especially as a parent. Trying to get out of a gang is one of the hardest things you can do. I didn't have a choice. It got to a point where I had to go out of the ends. So leaving the area where I was from, I had to move to a different area. And this is because I've seen people die. This is because I got attacked. I'd been stabbed myself. And I just knew in my mind there were 2 directions for me. There was prison, or there was being stabbed or ending up dead. But it was in that moment of darkness where I realized I need to make a bigger decision. I need to make a decision of what I'm going to do with my life. But it took me going and speaking to the people who were my elders and saying, and exactly telling them what I'm telling you right now on camera, is that I've had enough, and that, my mental health at the time wasn't in a good place. I wasn't able to speak to any of them ever again. I wasn't welcomed. I was actually advised to stay out of the area. Because I was actually able to get out of the situation, I feel a responsibility to be a voice to other people. Since leaving the gang, my number 1 priority was to work on myself to become a better person. So right now, I'm a mentor and a coach. As a mentor, I work with young people in schools, prisons, universities, helping them understand their mindset, helping them to make better decisions. And as a peak performance coach, I'm working with individuals to do exactly the same thing, but also to help them understand what drives them as humans. There are definitely aspects of being around the gang activity that I do regret. But right now, what I'm doing with young people, adults, and people at all levels of society, I wouldn't be able to have those conversations if I didn't go through what I've been through.
My name is Jay Dobbins. I'm a retired undercover federal agent, and I infiltrated the Hells Angels. This is how crime works. With all the hatred from me in that gang and from their supporters, they can take some satisfaction of that. They ran right over the top of me. All that battle damage, all those things happened, the failed prosecution, all that blood, sweat, and tears, they ran right over the top of me and kept going. I was just a speed bump. I was part of the Hells Angels investigation, which we named Operation Black Biscuit, from 2001 to 2003. I answered to a case agent. We were both ATF agents. My false persona, I went by the name of Jay Davis. The gang members knew me as Jaybird, and I portrayed myself to be a gun runner, a debt collector. The Hells Angels don't have to actively recruit members. They want people that bring them value. I had spent some time as an associate of the Hells Angel, so getting to know them, getting to let them get familiar with me. And I was invited to the clubhouse. And the invitation, it wasn't so much an invitation as it was an order. They believed that I was doing debt collections and that I was running guns within their territory. So I was told that if I intended to keep doing that business, I had to come to their clubhouse and meet their members and basically have them sanction me to continue. I showed up at the Mesa Clubhouse and was greeted in the street by 4 or 5 Hells Angels. Some had guns, some had baseball bats. In Arizona, you can open carry firearms. And so I had guns that were exposed on me. Some of the members who were basically working as security told me, you can't bring your guns inside our clubhouse. That's not allowed. And I told them, I'm not taking my guns off. and I don't take them off for anybody, including the Hells Angels. You have people that you feel like you need to defend yourself against, so do I. If I allowed them to start dictating everything to me, it was never going to end. And at that point, one of the shot callers from the Hells Angels came out and put his arm over my shoulder and he said, look, I make the rules and you can come in with your guns on. So right off the bat, from that very first critical interaction, like I felt like I was winning. The Hells Angels call themselves a club, the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. There's charters, and within the charter, the chapter, the group, there's a president, a vice president, a warlord, which is in charge of weapons and retaliations and defense. When I was associated with the Mesa Hells Angels, which is where I started, their president was Bad Bob Johnston. And he was a very well-respected, feared, longtime Hells Angel. If I could gain his trust, that his trust would be projected to other members and would open doors for me. In the biker gang, you start off very slowly. The first step is that you're an associate, which is you're just someone who's spending some time in the presence of the gang members. Once you build a relationship, the gang will ask you to hang around. Then after you prospect, ultimately, hopefully, you're doing that to become a full patch member. From the date of your prospecting, from when it starts, there's a minimum mandatory of 365 days. And that's to some extent how they insulate themselves, because they know that a cop can't keep pace with them and can't keep up with them for that long of time. To be a full patched Hells Angel, it is everything to those members. The patches that they wear and the formatting of their vests, which are also called cuts, is very important in this hierarchy. I was a hang-around for the Skull Valley, Arizona charter of the Hells Angels. So I had a black cut that had nothing but Skull Valley on the front. When you become a prospect, you get your bottom rocker, the bottom curved patch. So when I was prospecting, I got an Arizona bottom rocker. When you become a member, then you get your top rocker, the designator Hells Angels or whatever the gang is, and your center patch, which the Hells Angels is the death head. To get full membership, you have to be voted on by the members of your charter, and you have to receive a 100% vote. If one member of that charter votes against you, your prospecting phase continues. There's another rule in the land of prospects, is that it takes as long as it takes. Territory is very important to the biker gangs. The territory you control influences how much money you can make within that territory. They're constantly trying to acquire territories of competitive gangs. The rivalry that I became most aware of or closest to was the Hells Angels rivalry with the Mongols motorcycle gang. The Mongols were a California-based biker gang. I was at the 2002 Laughlin River Run, which was a major biker run in Laughlin, Nevada. The Mongols' home base was Harrah's Casino, which was a short drive up the main Laughlin Drag, Casino Drive, to where the Hells Angels home base was, which was the Flamingo Hotel. Some Hells Angels went down to Harrah's and started poking the tiger and got surrounded, and it was on. And it was every man for himself. I stepped outside of the Flamingo, and police cruisers and police motorcycles and cars and police helicopters were all screaming down Casino Drive. And I was with another agent, and I turned to him and I said, well, I guess we know where the Hells Angels went, because the police response was massive. The Harrah's Casino riot, the Morongo Casino riot, the Twin Peaks shooting in Texas. Those biker clashes are taking place all the time. we typically don't see it or hear about it until it takes place in a public venue where civilians, where just common man citizens are involved in it. There were fights that I was present for, that I knew the rules. I didn't want to blow my cover, but at the same time, I didn't want to watch some innocent civilian get beat down. I would find the target of the beating and throw some legitimate punches on them. Like I wasn't faking throwing good, hard, solid punches on the victim of this rat packing. But in essence, what I was doing was protecting that victim's head. I wasn't going to kill anybody punching them in the head, but they would have gotten killed if they take a steel-toed boot in the forehead. I got a call from a Skull Valley charter officer. Get to the clubhouse right now and bring all your hardware, which meant bring your guns. I was told the banditos are coming to Las Vegas. Las Vegas is our territory, and they have not requested a hall pass. We expect you to shoot them before they get the kickstands down on their motorcycle. And here's the kicker. We're going to be watching you from a distance. If you don't shoot them, we are going to shoot you. I was able to get in touch with the case agent, Joe Slatella, and tell him what my orders were. Joe Slatella found this pack of banditos, pulled them to the side of the road, and stopped them. So I showed up at the target location with the Hells Angels watching me, but the banditos never showed up. In the eyes of the Hells Angels, all they knew is we sent Jaybird to Las Vegas to kill banditos, and dang it, he was there, ready to handle his business. I allowed the Hells Angels to see me in criminal situations in order to hopefully avoid some of those mud checks that I knew were coming. In biker land, a mud check is a test to see if you're gonna your pants when you're confronted with a treacherous situation. So they would accurately see me in a narcotics transaction. I would either receive or give narcotics and either receive or give money in exchange, all while being witnessed by a Hells Angels like enforcer, bodyguard. What they didn't realize is that the person that I was in the transaction with was another law enforcement officer who was playing the role of a drug dealer. The local police departments, the local officers, they weren't in on the scheme. I got stopped by the cops all the time. I got beaten up by the cops. I was never as good of a motorcycle rider as the Hells Angels were. They could perform tricks, do all kinds of crazy stunts that I couldn't do. And riding in a pack of Hells Angels, it takes an enormous amount of focus. You have to trust the person riding next to you because they're so close. Like one person makes a mistake in that conga line of motorcycles and everybody's going down. I was told, when you meet a Hells Angel and you got your sunglasses on, you better lift your sunglasses up and look that person in the eye. That member wants to see your eyes. I was told if I had riding gloves on, you better take your riding glove off when you shake hands with a Hells Angel. Never touch a Hells Angels patch. Never slap them on the back. I made those mistakes and was reprimanded for it, was smacked for it on occasion. With regards to women, there's a hierarchy that takes place within the gang. There's old ladies who are the wives or girlfriends of members, and they're off limits. You better not get caught trying to mess around with a member's wife or girlfriend because there's a violent price to pay. But there's also women who, they move from member to member to member. Members can leave the gang of their own free will in good standing. Like in essence, they can retire. And when they retire, they're considered out good. They still have to relinquish all their Hells Angels property. But if you're out bad, they will come and take back their cut, their vest. They will take back your motorcycle. That's their property in their eyes. And they'll take back that tattoo. I was a part and a piece of the process of those reclamations of Hell's Angels property. Like basically almost like the police doing a search warrant, breaking into a guy's house and taking every single thing that said or looked like it belonged to the Hell's Angels. The Hell's Angels operate independently in their charters as far as how they make money and how they conduct their business. So there's charters that run a fairly clean business and that aren't involved in a lot of crime. There's others that are involved in narcotics trafficking, gun running, extortions, protection rackets. There's no payday or no salary to be drawn by being a member of the Hell's Angels. There's no big universal bank account that issues paychecks. There was Hell's Angels members that I ran across that were selling street drugs and putting those profits in their pocket and keeping at least the bulk of that profit for themselves. And then they have legitimate businesses that they can push money through. Just the swag and paraphernalia of the Hell's Angels is a multi-million-dollar business. The Hell's Angels hold toy runs, and they conduct blood drives, and they do community service. And that shouldn't be taken away from them. They make positive contributions to society with those things. Hell's Angels parties could be as spontaneous as the drop of a hat. You could be at the clubhouse, and the next thing you know, music's blaring, and guests are arriving, and women are coming in, and the booze is flowing. They could be inside, outside. They happened at parks, campsites. There's a myth that every Hell's Angel is a drug addict. There was Hell's Angels that were fitness freaks that took care of themselves. They ate well. They got their rest. They didn't drink. They didn't smoke. So to decline those things wasn't necessarily a false alarm, a red flag against you. I have a tattoo of St. Michael on my arm. And St. Michael is the patron saint of law enforcement. It signifies good triumphing over evil. There was times when I got pressed where I would show my St. Michael tattoo and say, do you understand what this is? I got this when I graduated from rehab. The reason why I'm here, the reason why you are interacting with me is because I'm sober, because I have money in my pocket, all those things that are attractive to you. As the infiltration investigation that I was working on started winding down, we had 2 years under our belts, lots of money, like well over $1 million invested in this investigation. And I still had not received membership. I still hadn't gotten my full patch. I was a prospect. To be quite honest, selfishly, I was trying to accelerate the process. So I went back to one of those very early statements that was made to me. What happens if I cross paths with a Mongol? I was told, it's your responsibility to kill him. So I went to the Skull Valley Hells Angels leadership and I told them, I've got a line on a Mongol in Mexico. We found this Mongol. I dug a shallow grave in the desert, took some Polaroid pictures of the murder. What they didn't know is that it was the ultimate scam. The murdered Mongol was a member of our task force that we had dressed up, concealed his face in the pictures, and then we'd used blood and guts from the butcher shop to create a murder scene, a crime scene. They made me a member there of the Skull Valley Charter, gave me a cut to wear. Now, after the fact, they have denied a couple things. They denied that they believed it. Okay, I understand that. They denied that I ever became a member. Both sides of that explanation are actually true. I was made a member of the Skull Valley Charter. I was given a cut and told that I was a Hell's Angel and that I was a member of Skull Valley. But I was also told, because I was within the 1-year prospect probation period, that an international vote would have to be taken to accelerate my membership. which never took place. Our case ended before the Hells Angels took that vote. So they're correct in that too. I've never tried to hedge that. I've never tried to dance around that or deny that. So the operation concluded for a couple reasons. We had a vast amount of evidence against our suspects, physical evidence, thousands of hours of tape-recorded conversation, criminal conversations. In the end, we indicted 55 Hells Angels and associates, and 16 of those were indicted on racketeering charges, RICO charges. Some charges were dismissed, some charges were reduced. In that discovery open source process, the Hells Angels learned that the person they thought to be Jay Davis, the debt collector, the gun runner, the contract killer, Jaybird, was actually Jay Dobbins, an ATF agent. And the threats against me and my family started stacking up. The Hells Angels held murder contracts on me. They were farmed to the Aryan Brotherhood. They were farmed to the MS-13 through the prison system. So all these people had their fingers on a murder contract for me. My family was in jeopardy. And in the summer of 2008, my house was burned to the ground. In the process of this Hells Angels case, I abandoned and betrayed my family. I made this investigation my priority. My wife and my kids weren't. I was trying to be a great undercover agent, and in the process, I betrayed my own family. That's one of the things, is that in this undercover role, I built real human relationships. Not every second was spent in the middle of some criminal activity or doing something violent or treacherous or illegal. I spent time with members writing, casually writing, not violently or threatening writing, shooting pool, hanging out. Members slept at my house. I slept at members' house. There's human relationships that are built, and you can never undercover out the human factor. There's people you like, there's people you don't like. It's no different than any other aspect of society. I wrote a book. It's titled No Angel, My Harrowing Undercover Journey to the Inner Circle of the Hells Angels. Then after I did that, and after I followed ATF's instructions to defend myself, they ultimately sued me for the book. I coached high school football at the end of my career and into my retirement, which I got a lot of satisfaction from. Like that service before self, trying to influence the lives of young men and teach them some football along the way.
My name is John Panisi. I'm a former made member of the Lucchese crime family. This is how crime works. The biggest misconception about Cosa Nostra and the people that are involved in that life are people really believe that there is honor, loyalty, and respect. These three principles which Cosa Nostra is based on, it no longer exists. Honor, loyalty, and respect have been replaced by selfishness and greed. The rules for a member is the rules of the family and the rules of Cosa Nostra. And those particular rules are, you're not to put your hand on another made member. You're not to go with another made member's wife or even girl, for that matter. You would need to be fully blooded Italian. Your mother and your father need to be Italian. Your bloodline needs to be all Italian. But with every rule, there's an exception. And there has been people who slip through the cracks, so to speak. One of the rules is you shouldn't get involved in lawsuits. You should not sue people. And I know that there was a rule where you're not to get involved in stocks and bonds. I'm not 100% sure if that's still in effect today. Specifically in New York, you were not to kill women and children of family members in the mob. They were not allowed to use explosive devices such as bombs, because on the other side, in Italy and Sicily, they were known to use explosives to take out members during a war or just to take a member out. They didn't want that kind of attention in New York. So there's an exception to every rule. Frankie DeCicco, who was the underboss for the Gambino family, had an explosive device put under his car, and he was blown up as a result of that. The no drug dealing rule applies to all the 5 families, but all the 5 families have drug dealing activities going on in it. Every family is going to have certain members that are involved in the drug business and kind of turn a blind eye to it because it brings in so much money. Cosa Nostra members today have no problem breaking the rules on a daily basis, whereas in Carlo Gambino's era, you couldn't break the rules. Breaking the rules meant getting yourself killed. So all these rules that were put in place for reasons are now being broken. So when you have an organization that no longer follows its own rules, it weakens the organization. Before they created the 5 families, the head of each family was called like a father, so that's where they would get the name Godfather. And at some point, they broke it down to 5 fathers, and there was 5 families. So the 5 families in New York are the Genovese family, which in the street, they were known as the West Side. That's how we refer to them. There's the Gambino family, there's the Lucchese family, there's the Colombo family, and the Bonanno family. And they're like the nucleus of Cosa Nostra for the United States. So as far as the 5 families all being in New York, they controlled the entire state of New York. It wasn't only New York City. And then you have the creation of the commission, which was the idea basically of Meyer Lansky, who looked at it as a board of directors. The commission consisted of the head of each of the families, those 5 families, and they would basically make decisions on anything that went on between them. Territories were divided obviously by what family represented which part of New York City. It's kind of, they cut their own turf out, but if it overlapped, that's where a commission would come in and make a ruling. So when they created the structure of the 5 families, they set it up more like a military. From the bottom of that pecking order, you have the associates, who are considered civilians. Anybody that's not a made member of that life is considered a civilian. Above them are the made members of the family, which are called friends. We call them friends in that life. Above them are captains, as we say, caporegines. They're the head of the crews. A family is represented by all the crews that are in that family. And then above them are the administration of the family. The top of the administration is the boss, the underboss, and the consigliere. And that's the structure of the whole family. The word Cosa Nostra means our thing. And that basically means that the structure of the mob, or as people would call it, mafia, belongs to them, the members of that life. The mob picks you. That life, Cosa Nostra, picks you. You don't pick that life. So before someone becomes an inducted member of a family, they become an associate. And usually how they become an associate is they're associated to someone who's already an inducted member. In order for an associate to be proposed, I think several factors take place. One is how good they get along with whoever it is that they're with, the soldier that they're with. You know, that they do what they're told to do. They keep their mouth closed. Once you're proposed, a ceremony takes place. Who's conducting that ceremony is going to be a member or members of the administration. Along with them is going to be obviously the captain that's going to propose you that day. A pistol and a knife are on the table during this ceremony, and it's mostly there for symbolic reasons. Your trigger finger, whether you're a righty or a lefty, is pricked. Your blood is dropped on a saint, a picture of a saint. It just symbolizes that the oath that you're taking and the oath that you're about to take, you're taking it holding that saint in your hand. And they ultimately light that saint on fire, and you're moving that saint from hand to hand, and you're repeating after whoever's conducting the ceremony. After which he is explaining the rules of that life to you. My position within the Lucchese family was as a soldier, but there was times that I acted for my captain in the capacity of an acting captain, specifically for a sit-down. The administration would pick the captains of the family. The requirement to be a captain obviously would be good leadership, so they would have to see something in that person to feel that he could lead the crew. That captain is responsible for each member of the crew, but he's also responsible for all the associates that are associated to that crew. A consigliere position is that of a counselor. So he is specifically handling not only internal, what we would call beefs or struggles inside of the family, but external as well. The difference between a boss and an underboss, there's not a whole big difference with the exception of the title. Obviously, the boss is the head of the family, but the underboss holds just as much weight in that family as the boss. Overall, a boss's position is to oversee the family. He's really in charge of everything that goes on underneath him, which goes through the administration, all his captains, all the soldiers in the family, all the way down to the associates. The way the life is structured, the boss is supposed to abide by the same rules that the captains, his administration, the soldiers, and everyone else in that life abide by. A boss of a family or a family together could bring in hundreds of millions of dollars per year. There's many reasons to fill a boss position. One obviously would be a boss is arrested, incarcerated. One would be a boss passes away through health reasons, and there is a void in the position. But then there's also reasons, like in the Paul Castellano situation, a boss that they felt was being greedy, and the family turned on the boss. There's different scenarios where a boss can be taken out, replaced, or ultimately killed, for that matter. I think years ago when it was first created, the five families, there was a lot more corruption with having law enforcement on the payroll than as it is today. I think there's less of that going on, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't go on. As far as political influence, obviously it would go through putting money in people's pockets for political favors. In present times, I don't think that they have the political power that they once had. I don't think they're able to corrupt the politicians as they were years ago. Initially, the mob took control of unions by force. They would put people in, those people would corrupt the union, take over the unions, and that's how they were able to control most of the unions, specifically in New York City. But today, they have their hand in it, in little areas, but they don't control the unions like they did in the past. Cosa Nostra came to be in New York sometime in the early 1900s. This was an organization and structure that came from the other side, which means Italy, Sicily. When the immigrants from those countries came here to this country, the Italians were almost like second-class citizens, and they were discriminated against when they came. So in the beginning, it was to fight oppression, but naturally that turned into committing organized crime. and criminal acts to gain a profit from. So when the average citizen started to take notice of Cosa Nostra here, I believe that the first reactions were fear and intimidation. Because they feared and they were intimidated over this group of Italians, they were also fearful to go to law enforcement. They were fearful to talk out against them. In turn, Cosa Nostra gained its power because of this. So I joined Cosa Nostra because I came from a neighborhood, both Ozone Park and Howard Beach, which was replete with guys in that life. And I believed that I looked up to them at that time and wanted to be just like them. If you're around people that are in that life, inducted members, at some point, you become an associate. And we were associated, my cousin and I, to the Gambino family through John Gotti Jr. And the time I'm talking about, I was around 14, 15 years old at that time. So sometime around 2012, I became an associate and on record with the Lucchese crime family. By 2013, I was an inducted member in the family. I stayed an inducted member in the family until 2018. I ultimately winded up leaving the life because the family that I was a member of falsely accused me of being an informant when it wasn't true. They now were laying on me, which meant that they sent people to lay and get my pattern. Usually when that is done, it's either to A, hurt you, or B, kill you. I made my decision that I would never go back to my former friends who turned on me. So obviously my life has took a dramatic change. I'm no longer able to see my family as much as I like to. I'm not able to live as close to them as I would like to. I have to watch every place I go, and be very careful at what I do. And my plans have to be mapped out of where I'm going and what I'm doing. So my life took a big change. In my opinion, in 20 years from now, Cosa Nostra is hardly going to exist in New York. I don't believe that they're going to be able to survive. Cosa Nostra now, compared to years ago, has definitely declined. And the reason is the sentences that are being handed out. The government, and specifically the FBI, have unlimited funds. They're able to go after them. They're able to take out bosses with the RICO. As far as earning money by committing crimes or doing various criminal acts, it's limited today than it was. So now once you limit money making and money earning, you're taking away power, because money brings power, and the organized crime today is definitely less powerful than it was in years past. In the past few years, there's been an increase in arrests and a large number of arrests in Cosa Nostra. Specific families are targeted, and the reason being is that it's hard for members of Cosa Nostra to operate without law enforcement, specifically the FBI, knowing what they're doing. There are more people that are informants, cooperators. They have people that are working inside families with the FBI, giving the FBI information. That's how they're dismantling families, family by family. They dismantle them. Members of law enforcement from the United States now work very closely with members of law enforcement from people outside of the United States, like Italy and Sicily. They jointly create cases together. I made the decision to create a blog, and I started just writing from my experiences. So the first podcast I created is also the name of the blog, which is called Sit Down News, and that's also the name of the podcast. And I just recently created a second podcast called Unlimited Substance.
My name is Jimmy Su. I have a nickname as Big Head. I'm a former high-level member of the largest Triads、新義安，呢個就係犯罪集團嘅形式。I decided to leave my life because I got sick and tired of it. And I almost got killed in 1992. I got shot 5 times. Do I know the person who shot me? Yes, I know the person who shot me. But I don't know why he shot me at that time. How many triads in Hong Kong? I can tell you there's a lot of triads. Sun Yong, 14K, 盛和, 水房. My situation is a bit special because I'm not in Hong Kong, I'm from New York. Okay, and in New York, I already have a lot of soldiers under me. When I joined the Tung On gang in Chinatown, New York, a couple of former members in Tung On, they are from Hong Kong. When they in Hong Kong, they already a triad, Sun Yee-on's member. So after they come to the United States, they still have a connection with Hong Kong triad. Because some things happened, I got arrested on 1985, remember, okay? So after I got out, the couple of members I mentioned before from Sun Yee-on, they asked me, hey, Jimmy, you want to, go to Hong Kong with us? Maybe you can, go outside and have some fun first because you're already inside for 2 years. I went back to Hong Kong with them. They took me to a restaurant and tell me wait over there. And then afterward, a guy come down, but he didn't look like a Triads leader, nothing. He looked like a businessman. You never mentioned this guy is the leader, okay? So the leader asked me a couple of questions like, what you do in New York? What's your position in New York? And I tell him the whole thing. So he's saying that like, okay, because I already have a lot of soldiers at my under level, okay, all the kids who follow me, they will become a Sun Yee-on tour. For the ceremony, there's a incense altar on the table. We have to swear a lot to the God or something, and we have to drink blood wine. And then the first thing they were saying that I will speak out in Cantonese because I don't know how to translate in English that one. 黃泉結義劉關張，一心護國喜洋洋。今日兄弟來結義，叩請帝君正當場。The rule for the triad, the main rule is like you obey your boss. Of course, you obey your main boss. There's only one main boss for the whole group, so you must obey him. And never against each other. And never steal money from each other. And never lie to each other. And never take girl from each other. My boss give me, as I remember, two nightclubs to collect money every month, which they call protection money. The shareholder must be like 1 or 2 shareholder for the nightclub is our member. In American, you can say that extortion, but they willing to give out money for the protection in American. But in Hong Kong, you must be a shareholder for this nightclub, and then you have your own people to protect the club. I tell you, honestly, we are there every night, at least 20 days a month. We got used to it, just like going to work, okay? Just like every day about time, we will like, okay, let's go to this nightclub tonight. Let's go to that nightclub tonight. Every night's like that. That's the gang life. For me, I got 2 nightclubs to collect. Every nightclub, they give me 20 grand each month. So a month, I get like 40 grand without doing something for 2 small nightclubs. But for the big one, as I know, they pay like 100 grand a month for each general. Back then, the triad business always production company, bowling alley, that's a legal business. And for the underground business, maybe money laundry, maybe drug money. They have business right here in the United States, in New York, in LA. They have business all over. Back then, I can say every gang in Chinatown, they have connection in Hong Kong. They all have connection in Hong Kong. The general from the other group, they start a business of drug trafficking. Back then, it's very easy to, smuggle the drug into United States. Maybe they have some girl member in the gang. They tell the girl to go back to Hong Kong and pick up something and bring it back in. At that time, it's very easy. It's not like right now. When the time I'm in Hong Kong, the movie business, I can say that is all controlled by Triad. If you don't listen to Triad, you cannot get a spot, not even a spot. You don't listen to them, okay, you will get punished. There's a movie star come out saying that, like, I'm not a Triad, whatever. You believe them, you believe them. Okay, but for me, I don't believe them. A lot of famous movie star, which is female, they are Triad member. A lot of people don't know, and we know. Every gangster got a nickname because we don't want to use our real name on the street. Easy to remember, I got big head and my name's Jimmy, it's too simple. A lot of people call Jimmy. So they won't forget, they always call me Big Head Jimmy. They have a nickname for Monkey, they have a nickname for Tiger Boy, Fat Boss. They have all kind of nicknames. They have all different kind of handshake. Like different position, they have different kind of handshake. Sometimes we do this, and then you show it your hand side, and then they know what's your position. Maybe the guy who talking to is a soldier, and then you show him the hand side is you are general, and then he don't know what is general hand side because he's only a soldier, so he only can show the soldier hand side. So if I saw it, you're only a soldier, I don't want to talk to you. Tell your boss to come out like this. They don't use that no more. Only the old generation. The generation after the 2000, they don't care. They don't care about this. They just care like how many people you have, what kind of power you have, how much you got. In Hong Kong, I never go out with myself. If I go this nightclub, at least like 20, 30 people who follow me go into the nightclub. So they knew. They knew you are the Triad. We got experience. We can tell who's a Triad, who's a cop, and who's a businessman. We can tell. For Triad, they have a couple kind of level. But for Sun Yee-on, the member on the top level, they are all controlled by one family. No other people can take their position. Every generation, they will pass down like father and son like this. So it's all controlled by one family until now. After the top level, the second level is the general. We call it 426. After the 426 is the soldier. For the soldier, they call it 49. And after the soldier, that's the people who hang out with the soldier every day, but they are not a member yet. They call it Blue Lantern. This is the main structure of the Triad. Of course, they have a lot of different positions, like white paper fan, that's the guy who controls all the money. That's the other position is for passing out the message. A special guy doing that. Now, at this century, a lot of position is gone. So only got left is the top level, general, the soldier, and the Blue Lantern. I only saw my boss in Hong Kong like 2 or 3 times. But I know his family member. When I get to the general position, the boss will give you a couple place, like couple of business place for you to collect money every month. That's our salary. I just make sure they are doing the right thing. They don't step out of the line. And that's what I did. With somebody step out on the line. Okay, there's so many people in the group, so many people. Always things happen because you cannot control everybody. I never did that before, but what I heard, the worst thing, they got killed. That's the worst, Okay, if they did something, against the company, against the group, okay, they will get killed. After me, I have like a couple of soldiers. They are in the group for a long time. They have experience, who know who control all the kids. They are doing all the management. So this thing won't happen. But sometime in the other group, this thing did happen. That's what I heard. Hong Kong is real small and too many triad members. They all have their own district. Like you control this part and 40K control the other part. But you know how the gangster is. They always want to increase their power. So they step in the district is controlled by the Sun Yee-on, and the war going to start. When I in Hong Kong, I saw another general in Sun Yee-on. They have like something going on with a general in 14K. They start a war, they want to take their territory. Yeah, I saw that before. But this always happened in Hong Kong and back then. Back then, in Hong Kong, they always, start a war, but they don't use gun. They always use knife. Because in Hong Kong, the firearm law is very strict. Even though they have a gun, they hardly go to bring the gun outside on the street. Almost impossible for people to get a gun license in Hong Kong. When the time in Hong Kong, who used the guns, always the gangster from China, from mainland China. Okay, they bring the gun from China and they use it in Hong Kong and they went back to China. But for the original member in Hong Kong, they hardly use the gun. Okay, maybe the lower level guy, but not the general. And if I start, we don't get involved. Only the soldier who start the fight. If we saw something and we know the war going to start, we back off, and then the soldier forward. Our different triad members, they are together to doing something. Yes, always. It's money talk. Easy, it's money talk. With one general, he think he cannot, take the whole cake, and he want to share out with another member or share out with different group, he will do that. Hong Kong is real small, I tell you. So you have to friend with other group too. Back then, in Hong Kong prison or Macau's prison, the whole prison is running by the Triad. The Triad got more power than the correctional officer. In the 60s and 70s, all the police was corruption and with the Triad. Okay, they work together. Until now, no, impossible. You can. It's very strict right now. You do something they don't like, you will disappear forever, and people cannot find you, and you are not facing a jail time. You just disappear. I decided to quit my gangster life. I got shot 5 times, and after that I said, no more. I got sick and tired of that because I'm getting old. The way I think is different. So I want to return to my normal life. So I quit. I know the person who shot me. But I don't know why he shot me at that time. Afterward, I found out. Because my soldier under me, people under me, shot their member 2 weeks ago. So they know I'm the general of them. So he shot me. That time I was at home and I ran out of cigarette. So I have to go down and try to buy a cigarette in the grocery. When I closed my driver's side door and I checked out the side mirror, I saw someone came out from a car behind. And then he started to shoot. And then the ambulance come like after at least 15 minutes, as I remember. They brought me to the Empress Hospital, and they do a surgery, and then the doctor come by and show me all the bullet, and tell me that we took 4 bullets out, and still a bullet inside your body. So I asked him, why don't you just take the last one out? And he was telling me that because that bullet is went into your bone. So that bullet will stay there forever. That's what the doctor say. What do I have to do to live? Actually, nothing. I just tell my soldier, because I have like a couple of soldiers who control all the kid already, I just tell them that start now, all the street money, the gambling house money, whatever, I'm gonna give up everything. You guys, take care the under-level people, and anything happen, you don't have to ask me. Even though after I left, I start working, and the FBI come to me, ask me a question. I say, I don't know nothing. I left already. That's it. In the 90s, the FBI, all the leader, all the gangsters got arrested and thrown in the prison. Without our help, they cannot stand in the United States no more, and then they back off and now disappear. The first beginning of Triad, okay, we call it a town, Hong Mun. Hong Mun is the first one. After that, they split out from Hong Mun to all separate triad. They call it Triad for the 3 big rivers in the southeast area. So inside that area, they call everybody a triad. Government people, they call them triad, and then they start to call themselves triad too. Sun Yee-on in Hong Kong is the largest triad, almost in the all Southeast Asian area. At my time, they have like 200,000 members and all over the world. They have a pretty long history. For all the high-level members in Sun Yee-on, they become a businessman now. They doing Egypt business, or undergrounding is only for the lower-level member. I was born in 1965 in Hong Kong. I born in a district called Yau Ma Tei. Inside Yau Ma Tei, there's a street called Temple Street. At that time, the whole street is controlled by the Triad. So when I was real young, I already know what is Triad. And my father saw like getting worse, my behavior getting worse. So he decided to immigrate the whole family to United States. At that time, there's a gang called Ghost Shuttle in Chinatown, always waiting outside the school every day, like after school. They try to do something to us and try to scare us and tell us to join the gang. If we don't, we have to pay them money every day for protection. But we keep refusing them. One of my classmates, he told us that we should go look for his cousin, Crips Wong, and he's the leader of the Tung On gang. My classmate got killed because the Fly Dragon, they thought my friend, he's belonged to the Tung On gang. But reach that time, we are not. So we asked Crips Wong for help, and he said, you guys just join our gang. So officially, we joined the Tung On gang. I started in Tung On gang member when I'm 14. When I become a member of Sun Yee-on, I'm 22. So I was already in the gang life for like 8 years already. We have a channel in YouTube, Chinatown Gangs story. We start to telling the true story about a gangster life. We want to do the best we can to find, every foremost gangster member, no matter what level they are, to tell their true story. So let the world know what the gangster life is. I just want to say that for the new generation, don't trust anybody except your parents. Don't trust any movie, story. You are not a hero in the gang life. If you really in the gang life right now, only 2 final results. First, you go end up in the prison doing time. Second, you go get killed.
My name is Mike Moy. I was a former member of a Chinatown gang. I later became an NYPD cop. And this is how crime works. You had so many guns that's hidden all over the place, secret tunnels, and you have snipers up in the safe houses. A crazy person wouldn't even dare to go to Chinatown because even a crazy person, they feel pain, they fear death. So as far as being in a Chinatown gang, you're either gonna wind up in jail or it's gonna be some outcome that's not gonna be good. So I was only 16 when I joined the gang, and it was one of the notorious Chinatown gangs during that time. There were a lot of rivals. In the 1970s, the Ghost Shadows and the Flying Dragons, those were the two main gangs. Eventually, you had the White Tigers, the Dongwon gang, the Fucheng, the Green Dragons, and the BTK. The violence between the gangs, I wouldn't say it's because of territory. I would say it's because of respect. Any form of disrespect warrants a killing, a shooting. Remember, these kids are young, 13, 15, 16-year-old kids. All they want is for people to show them a little respect. Maybe it's because they're insecure about themselves or they have low self-esteem. It's all about respect, and a lot of people died because of disrespect. When we were in the gang, most of us at one time or another had some sort of interaction with the Italian Mafia. Even I, myself, in my early 20s, were dealing with guys in their 40s and 50s. But these young Italian teenage kids, they're the ones who were a problem to us. And there were some shootings where some of our guys, we killed some of them. They walk around with their bats and canes and want to be tough, and they didn't know who they were messing with because we were never afraid. You know, we felt we were invincible. During my teen years, we would do extortion, street robberies, petty stuff, petty crime. But then as I got older, got into my 20s, started selling marijuana, dealing with counterfeit money, credit card fraud, stolen credit cards from a source that we had in the post office. I opened gambling houses. A gambling house that we hung out in on Canal Street, right next to the Rosemary Theater in the basement. We would have poker machines from the Italians. They would put the poker machines in there. Sometimes we would have poker tables, pai gow tables, where we collect the percentage. So that was one of the most profitable business I had. And also bootleg videotapes. Back in those days, the VCR tapes, those Shaw Brother Kung Fu movies, they made me a lot of money too. All we had to do was get a bunch of VCRs and copy those tapes. So we're talking about probably around that time, probably the 80s and 90s. After the Italians lost the heroin business in the Pizza Connection trial, yeah, there was a vacuum and the Chinese took over. The Chinese were able to import high quality heroin into Chinatown. They dominated that business for a short while. Just imagine how much money was circulating in Chinatown during those days in just a few block radius. I mean, you had cab drivers, waiters, waitresses benefiting from all that money, even factory workers, because the gangsters would spend that money into Chinatown. Yeah, they extorted from the stores, but they weren't out there to put the stores out of business, how the media portray us. All the business in Chinatown was flourishing during that time. Look at Chinatown back then. It never sleep. It's open like 24 hours. You get the gang members go into a restaurant during the Chinese New Year's, during whatever holidays, and the owner's gonna give them a little red envelope. It's just a little piece of what they're giving, less than what they probably pay for the garbage disposal, right? To the Italians, you know, we did protect the neighborhood. And I even have personal experiences protecting the businesses, you know, doing what I needed to do back in those days to protect the business owners from getting bullied by people who didn't even know better. Some of those people will remember me for the rest of their life. The person that you least expect to be a gang member, and that's the person that's carrying the gun. So when we travel in a group, For example, we go into a pool hall and we're shooting a pool. There'll be a kid in the corner of the pool hall watching over us, and that's the kid that has the gun. There could be a targeted hit where, okay, you're gonna go get this person and kill this person, yes. But a lot of times, when they're in the streets, you can't control what they do. It's very easy to get a gun back in those days. I know in the 70s they had a source with the Italians getting guns from the Italians. In the 80s and 90s, it wasn't that difficult to go out of state and buy a gun. Just show your ID and you just, in the flea market, and you just buy a bunch of antique guns. Safe houses are located all over. We had safe houses in Brooklyn, by Williamsburg, one by Midwood, Queens, by Woodhaven. So we had several places where we hold our meetings. At any given time, there could be as much as 10, 15 people in that apartment, sleeping there, living there. We kept it very low-key, a side entrance, so it doesn't appear to be a lot of people going in and out. So the runners will go out there and buy whatever's necessary, whether it's food or drinks, whatever they need. Generally, the police wouldn't even care about these things. What they care about are guns. But luckily, we hid our guns in a way where the police couldn't find it. One of the ways what we did was we were on the second floor. So we were tying a string and lower it down to the first floor. So all you see was a string, on the floor. But who would expect when you pull up that string, there's a gun there? There's so many secret tunnels and places for them to hide guns. As far as the tunnels, you had them on Mott Street, Bayard Street, Canal Street, Pell Street, Doyle Street, like these places. Those tunnels was used as a form of escape. After you do a shooting, you just run into the tunnel and just come out from the other side of the street. That's why there's so many cold cases in Chinatown. I was 16 years old when I joined the gang. I saw it as a way to protect me from the bullies. During my years in school, I was like the only Asian kid. So I was a victim of bullying. How did I become a member of the gang? Initially, I started hanging out with them. And when they started to trust me, they know I was able to do things for them. That's when I got accepted. And they would give you a nickname, such as like Big Head, and say, hey, you have a big head, so we're gonna call you Big Head. His Onion Head nickname came from his hairstyle. The newspaper and journals claim that Onion Head's nickname came from if you betray him, he'll give you tears. That's why they call him Onion Head, but that is not true. He looked like an onion head with his haircut back in those days. They tried to give me a nickname. I put a stop to it. I'm that type of person. I like to stay under the radar, keep a low profile, and I was firm about it, and they respected that. But what they call me behind my back, that's another story. And we did an initiation ritual together with 2 other members. We kneeled down and we lit up the incense. We poured wine in front of the General Guan and to give him an offering. In the wine was our blood. We pricked our fingers. After the initiation, we felt like a certain bond, like a brotherhood. What the Italians would call probably associate, you would call Leng Zai, what the Italians would call a street soldier. We would call them Ma Zai, like a captain, a Dai Ma. Underboss, that would be Dai Lo, which is big brother. The leader, Dai Lo Dai, and that would be the guy at the top. So how does one become a Dai Lo? Start out as a soldier, and if you have the qualities of a Dai Lo, such as the gift of gab, you have the charisma, then you have these kids following you. You spend money on them, and once you have a crew, you become a Dai Lo. The Dai Lo would give the money to the Dai Ma. That goes to pay for everything, as far as entertainment, food, expenses, the safe house, paying the rent. The money trickles down to us. Unlike the Italians, where the money trickles up, they have to pay for our loyalty. What we do in the streets, we basically enhance their reputation. A lot of people have the misconception that tongues, triads, and gangs are the same thing. It's not. The tongues were former gang members in Chinatown who later tried to become a legitimate enterprise association trying to help the new immigrants coming into this country. But you have a handful of bad apples that associated themselves with the gangs, and they used the gangs to do the dirty work. The Flying Dragons was under the Hip Sing Tong Association, the Ghost Shadows was under the On Leong Association, and the Tung On Gang was under the Tung On Association. The Flying Dragons had control of Pell Street, Doyer Street, and later on they moved on to Canal Street and Grand Street. The Ghost Shadows had control of Mott Street, Bayard Street. The White Tigers went to Queens, Elmhurst. Later on, the Tung On Gang was created, and they took control of East Broadway. Do the Chinatown Gangs still exist today? Yes, they do, but they operate differently. A lot different than what I grew up with. There isn't a Dai Lo, so to speak. There isn't a big leader like how we had. They keep it totally underground. Back in those days, we dealt with a lot of federal crimes that want the attention of the FBI. The NYPD didn't have the resources to take on the Asian gangs. They didn't even have the translators available to translate. They were just there to help the FBI, but it was the FBI that cracked these cases. It was around 1993. The FBI started rounding up a lot of people, and that's when it started falling apart. The people at the top was getting locked up, so the people at the bottom didn't know what to do. Most of the gang members were arrested by the feds, or they were killed or in prison. That's when I made the transition. And in order to make that transition to go into the NYPD, it had to be like a light switch. It was like an on and off switch. It was either all or nothing. You know, I grew up watching Beretta, Kojak. What happened to Stephen McDonald, if you follow his story, he forgave the kid who shot him. And when Stephen McDonald mentioned that this kid was a product of his environment, did a lot of self-reflection, and I see that how I grew up, you know, it made me who I am, and maybe I need to change. So I joined the NYPD in 1995, but the gang was always there for me up until that day. When I took the oath, I left everything behind. I was assigned to work in Chinatown, so I didn't expect to be working in Chinatown, my old stomping grounds as a gang member, and that was a little bit nerve-wracking because what would happen if I bumped into my rivals or my fellow gang mates? And it did happen. I bumped into my rivals in uniform. I bumped into my former gang mates in uniform. Even when I was assigned to the detective squad and I got promoted many years later, some of these guys came out from prison and I was assigned to arrest them. Some of them couldn't make a living, so they started doing home invasions and robberies, robbing stores and taxi cabs and whatnot. They started getting involved with different type of rackets now. They didn't get involved with the heroin trade anymore because the feds were watching that. So they got involved with other things like the transportation business, the dollar vans, the bus going out of state. They still did their gambling houses, and the prostitution houses were run differently as opposed to back in those days where you would go into a prostitution house and you would see 10, 15, even 20 girls. So what they did was they broke it up into like an apartment, you know, and they would only have like maybe 1 or 2 girls. The gangs were operating a lot differently. Nobody wanted to call themselves a Dai Lo anymore. I love the NYPD. NYPD gave me everything I have, you know, for all those years. It's just that I had a bad experience while working with some bullies in the NYPD. That left a bad taste in my mouth. So it was time for me to leave. I left July of 2021. After over 26 years, I started this channel called Chinatown Gang Stories to get these stories from former gang members who lived a life, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. A lot of the information came from non-Asians, movies, authors, and documentaries. My channel will give you an accurate description of what really happened in Chinatown back in those days. What that I learned from being in a gang, just don't do it. Between social media, like the technology, cell phones and plate readers, DNA, facial recognition, Big Brother's watching everything you do. So there's no place in today's society for gangs anymore.
湯山信也と申します。私は元ヤクザの組員で、逮捕歴は11回。これから話すことは犯罪の仕組みです。要はどこかのその境でヤクザのその美徳というものが暴力とか仁義であったり筋であったり、そういったものから少しこう変わってきた時代があるんですよ。そして今はほとんどが昇格のポイントになるのは、お金をどれだけ上に上げてるかっていうのが今の現状です。だから僕が例えば組長時代に僕の代わりに刑務所にいた人間もいます。お金を稼ぐことばかり考えてたので、今考えると良くないなというふうには思いますね。私がヤクザに入ったのは、18歳の時です。大工さんの仕事をしていた時に、心臓と腰をやってしまって、で、その時に、金融の仕事をしたかったんですね。でその金融の仕事をしたところが闇金融で僕の組長がいたところだった。組長から杯というものをもらいます。そしてその杯の中にお酒を入れて、そして3度に分けて飲むんですね。その杯をこういう形でグッグッグッ、これで、儀式が終わります。そしてその儀式が終わった時点で親と子、子分と親分というものが成立します。ヤクザに入った時点で、組織に対して、名前を登録します。そしてその名前が登録された時点で組織の方にはその名前が登録されちゃうんで、警察が家宅捜査に入った時、その時に名前が割れてしまうんですね。警察の本部の方に登録をされて、ヤクザの認定というふうな形になります。親分と会う時は基本的に、親分の家というのは、ドアが開きっぱなしです。出てこいと言われて出ていく時もあれば、もう何も言われずに顔を見せに来ましたという時もあれば、でその中で月に1回もしくは週に1回の、ミーティングをして会合というんですけども、会合をして、いろんな報告をし合う。そして、毎日電話連絡で定時連絡と言います。これを朝と晩捕まってないのかどうかの報告を本部に入れて、でそれを本部長が聞いて、その本部長がまた、自分の組長に、知らせるっていう連絡体制は整ってます。基本的に、親分と対立することは絶対に許されません。しかし、やっぱり人間なんで、不満はあります。親分が子分に対して、やっぱりしつけというものはあります。やっぱりうちの親分に関してはちょっと気性がすごく荒かったんですね。覚醒剤を使用した、もしくは組の中でやっちゃいけないことをやってしまった場合に、その時はやっぱりしつけとして、ボコボコにされてました。指詰めというのはけじめの問題です。で、これがなぜじゃあ小指を切るのかという部分に関しては、日本人は刀を持ってました。右で振るんではなく、刀って左で引くんですね。その時に昔はこの小指がすごく大事だったんで、その感覚をもうなくしてしまえと。僕自身も実際指詰めをしました。ここ小指は、なくなっております。僕は親分が好きだったんですね。そしてその親分に対して一つだけ嘘をついてしまったことがあるんです。 そしてその嘘に対して僕が耐えきれなくて、そして、親分に対して申し訳ないという気持ちで指を詰めて持っていきました。まだ若干20歳ぐらいだったんで、やり方がよく分かってなくて、これもね、痛いかどうかも2パターンあるんですね。要は上から落としてこい、指を詰めてこいって言われた時は痛いんです。でも自分が悪いなと思って指を詰めた時、これは痛くないんです。要はアドレナリンが出てるんですね。申し訳ない、持っていかないといけない、指を組長が預かります。そしてその組長が、神社の木の下に埋める人もいれば、事務所の、冷凍庫に、保管してる人もいれば、事務所の神棚に、ずっと祀ってる人もいれば、これはいろいろ形があります。その時からやっぱり僕は自分の組長のことがすごく好きだったんで、僕のその愛情を、組長が買ってくれて、21歳で行動隊長という、役付けをいただきました。22歳で刑務所に行くんですけども、刑務所に行く前に僕が組織してた暴走族というチームがあるんですけども、そこから5年の刑務所に行って、そして、出てきた時に若頭組長がいて、そしてこの組長の下にはみんな子分なんですね。若頭というのは長男です。若頭というのは、ナンバー2、そして、尽くしていくっていうことなんで、それぞれがみんな尽くしていくところがあるんですね、組織には。なので、組織が崩れずにしっかりまとまってるっていう部分です。日本のヤクザっていうのは、親子の関係なんで、ヤクザの、親子の縁というのは家族以上の絆であらないといけない。ヤクザに決まり事はめちゃくちゃあります。ただ、この決まり事に関しては守ってるところの方が少ない。人のものを取っちゃいけない、盗んでそれを利益にしちゃいけないっていう掟もあります。でも、盗みを仕事にしてるヤクザも多いです。そして人を騙しちゃいけない、詐欺をしちゃいけない、これも掟の中であります。なんかすごく社会のルールを守れない人間たちばっかりなのに、ヤクザにはいっぱいのルールがあるんですよ。女性に関する事件を起こすなとか、犯しちゃいけないとか、そういったものもいっぱいあります。でもなかなかそれが守られてるってことはなかなかない。女性に関しては、ヤクザの方もおります。ただ稀です。これはなかなかいない。でも組織によっては受け入れる方もおられるんでしょうけども、基本的には受け入れられない。ただ僕の知り合いにも一人、ヤクザをやってた女性の方がいます。その方に関しては入れ墨も手首まで、そして、小指もありません。ヤクザの全員が全員、タトゥーを入れてるわけではありません。ちなみに僕は、手首まで入っておりました。もともとはここまで入ってました。それを今この分消しました。この両方、これだけで100万円です。ヤクザを見せかけてるような人もいっぱいいます。やっぱり例えばこれは人間の潜在意識の問題ですけども、入れ墨を出して歩く、これはやっぱり見た目で人を威嚇しちゃうっていう日本人独特のマナーというかルールというものがあるんですね。僕はもうそういう人を見ても無視します。ヤクザのいい部分に関してはもちろんその人助けというものを、したりはします。僕が例えばなんですけども、宮城県の 3.11 の大津波、その時にボランティアで宮城県に行ったんですね。今の時代で言うとどうしてもヤクザに、例えば助けてもらいました、もちろんヤクザに助けてくださいと言えば助けていただけます。でもその後がいろいろとやっぱ面倒くさいんですよ。結局あの時助けたから今度はお前があの恩を返せというふうになってくるんですね。例えばヤクザにもいろんなしのぎがあるんですね。でそしてその中に、お正月とかそういった時に 置物があるんですよ、干支の。そういったものを付き合いをさせられたり、もしくはお正月の何かを買わされたり、要は毎月毎月いくらか持ってこいとか、そういった部分で、要は恩をそういうお金の形で返してこいっていうふうなヤクザが今多いです。ヤクザから例えばお金を借りて、飛んだりとか、いなくなることを、払わなくなっていなくなることを、専門用語で飛ぶっていうんですけど、これはめちゃくちゃ多いです。それで、見つかって、僕これは一回ちょっと経験したことがあるんですけど、うちの組からお金を借りて、そして、逃亡して、そして見つかった。で見つかった時に、その当時ちょっとこれは P 入れてほしいんですけども、の方に、奴隷として、300万で買い取るというふうなことがあったんで、それは派遣さ、他の国に、行きました。ヤクザが恐喝で、お店からお金を取るというよりも、その例えば、キャバクラ飲み屋さんですよねからそのキャバクラで何か問題があった時に、やっぱりお酒を飲むところって問題が生じるんですよ、必ず。でそういう時に、店をむちゃくちゃにされたりとか、そういった時に、ヤクザに連絡をして、でそこで、問題を解決してもらう。そして、その守ってもらってるっていう部分で、毎月いくらかお金を払うっていうのはやってます。ただこれも、今のその時代になって、要は妨害条例っていうんですけども、この妨害条例が厳しくなって、ヤクザと関わっちゃダメっていうのが色濃くなったんですね、社会的に。ヤクザが稼ぐ今一番多い、しのぎに関してはやっぱり覚醒剤。覚醒剤に関しては、僕の組に関して絶対に扱っちゃいけないっていうルールを決めてたんですよ。なので、他の人間はみんな覚醒剤を扱ってました。ヤクザに入ってどのぐらい稼ぐかに関してはそれぞれの、器量だろうと思います。僕が2回目の刑務所を出てきて建築の仕事、そして風俗の仕事をやっておりました。風俗の仕事の、お店だけでだいたい毎月でいうと300万ぐらい、それから建築の仕事がだいたい100万ぐらい、それと別で恐喝とかそういったものもやってたんで、それと別にもまだ収入があります。そこで、政治と絡んで公共工事を取って、そこからいろんな賄賂で、公共工事を仕上げていくっていうふうなのではすごく横行してます、賄賂は。警察でヤクザつながってる人もいっぱいいます。僕が始めたばかりの、18歳の時はまだ拳銃を、警察に提出して、これを警察が受け取れる時代だったんですよ。拳銃を、自首という形で、ヤクザからもらうと、これボーナスが出るんですね。日本はそもそも拳銃を認められてない国なんで、そして、島国というものなので、なかなか武器の輸入がもともと難しい国ではあるんですね。ヤクザが使う拳銃に関してはほとんどが輸入してます。特に一番日本で使われているのはトカレフで、その他でいうと、改造拳銃コルト製のアナコンダというモデルガンがあるんですけど、逮捕で言ったら11回あるんですけど、僕が前科一犯になった時に、車を路駐してたんですよ。そして、違反で、その車を警察署に持って行かれたんですね。夜忍び込んで、でエンジンかけて、で、持って行こうとしたんですけど、で、前科二犯の時は決闘罪といって、これはすごく珍しい犯罪なんですけども、昔明治時代、日本の明治時代に日本人が武士をやめて刀を置いた時代があるんですね。それから決闘罪というものが制定されたんです。僕が面倒を見てた暴走族が、対立する暴走族と喧嘩になったんですよ。でそれで、その時に僕がその喧嘩を主催したっていうことで、百何十年前の罪を僕に持ってきて決闘罪ということで、これで、刑務所に行きました。僕が1回目の刑務所に行った時に知り合った、僕の組員がいるんですけど、この人間が出てきた時に僕のお金を持って逃げたんですね。でその探した時に、 たまたま見つかったんで、その時はハンマー分かります？台で、バチバチ叩いて、で、それで、最後の刑務所、3年間勤めました。ヤクザというよりもこれは刑務所の合言葉っていうのがいっぱいあります。例えば部屋の中で何か悪いことをするときに見張りがいるじゃないですか。見張りのことをしけって言うんですね。そして刑務官が歩いてきたときに知らせることをズズって言って知らせます。その他で言うと、そうですね、スワットといって、親分を守る部隊が編成されてるんですね。その編成されてるところはそれぞれ組織によって合言葉っていうものはいっぱいあります。例えばですね、ヤクザの世界に地切りという言葉があります。でこの地切りというのは、上から命令されて誰かを殺してこいとかそういった時に、その殺人を遂行できた人間に関しては、刑務所に15年から20年もしくは今の刑でいうと30年、服しますんで、その方に関してはかなり、昇格されます。昔はヤクザが、当たり前にみんなを守ってた時代があったんです。なので昔はうざくなかったんです。でも警察がどんどん力をつけてきて、要はこれは戦後の話ですね。戦後からどんどん、警察が力をつけてヤクザが必要なくなってきたんですよ。もう今どんどん、このヤクザという組織は停滞してますっていうのが、犯罪者の数って減らないんですよ、どうしても。でも今まで、ヤクザという組織にいた人間たちが今度ヤクザを辞めて別の犯罪を犯し出すんですね。そうなるとルールがもう何もなくなるんですよ。今の若者がヤクザに興味がないのはもうしょうがないのかなとは思いますけどね。昔の時代で言うとヤクザがすごく栄えて、そしてヤクザがかっこいい時代があったんです。やっぱりヤクザとして一生懸命生きてる人たちもいると思います。でもそうじゃない人たちの方が多くなってしまったんですね。ことはやっぱりついていきたいって思う人も必然と減るんじゃないかなと思いますけど。刑務所から出てきた時に、ちゃんとした仇になるんですけども、それがちょうど10年前ぐらいに、刑務所から出てきました。これが最後の僕の犯罪です。僕はちゃんともちろん辞めたんですけど、辞めたいと思って辞めますって言ってくる人間の方が多分少ないと思います。基本的にはもう何も言わずに飛んじゃう、音信不通になる。これは10人十色で、いろんなその辞め方ってあるんですね。例えば、支援センターがあります。そういうところに、相談に行ってどういうふうに辞めたらいいかという助言を聞くこともできます。何もかも筋を通さないといけないっていうわけじゃないんですよ。ヤクザっていうのは結構筋にこだわります、正直。でもこの筋っていうのはヤクザも都合がいいんですね。このヤクザを辞めて10年の中にいろんな資格を取らせていただいたんですよ。要は僕が、資格を取ったのは全部建築の、資格です。僕なんかで言うと人よりも遅れてるわけですよ。30過ぎて、普通の一般社会人になったんで。やっぱり日本人のその感覚の中にやっぱり刑務所に入った人を受け入れがたいっていうのはやっぱりそれはあります。要は資格は今でも取れます、刑務所は。でも一握りなんです。要はこれが、一般社会に帰って社会復帰した時に役に立つのかどうかで言ったらほとんど役に立たないんですよ。建築の世界に入って、建築の仕事をずっとやってました。そして、兄の会社で6年間働いて、そして、自分で独立して今4年目になるんです。そうですね、僕が今最も伝えたいもの、これはやっぱり今まで犯罪を犯してきた人がそこにとらわれずに、一生懸命やれば人生って変えれるんだよっていうのをすごくみんなに伝えたいなと思います。でその保護観察っていうのを取得するためのその保護士さんっていうのがいるんですよ。そういったその保護士さんの資格をもらってで、なんか支援をしていけたらいいなっていうふうに考えてます。